Kindly be seated. Greetings to Professor Dr. Jennifer Smith-Mary, Director of Center on Disability Policy and Research from the University of Sydney. Professor Dr. Ruzita binti Muhammad Amin, Head of Disability Services Unit, International Islamic University of Malaysia. Dr. Iqmal Hisham bin Matta, Senior Lecturer of Faculty of Law from University Technology Mara. Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Talib bin Muhammad Hashim, the Dean of Faculty of Human Development, UPSI. Dr. Kwe Ang Ho, Head of Department of Special Education, UPSI. Dr. Nurbita binti Abdul Aziz, Program Director, International Symposium of Center on Disability and Community Inclusion 2023. Mr. Iqmal Redzwan bin Muhammad Isa, Assistant Registrar Faculty of Human Development, UPSI. And not to forget, respected administration officers from the Faculty of Human Development and participants from UPSI, as well as agencies from all across Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself before we begin. My name is Vanessa Rachel from the Faculty of Human Development, UPSI, and today I will be the master of your ceremony. On behalf of the Faculty of Human Development, we would like to welcome all of you to the International Symposium of Center on Disability and Community Inclusion 2023. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to call upon Dr. Muhammad Muslim bin Madzali to recite the dua.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Hamdan yuafi ni'amahu wa yukafi mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jala wajhika wa azimi sultanik. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma ya Allah, in the name of Allah, the beneficent, the merciful, praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Let your blessing and your peace be on your servant and your messenger Muhammad and on his family and his companions. Allahumma ya Hafiz, ya Raqib, on this glorious morning, in conjunction with the opening ceremony of the International Symposium of Center on Disability and Community Inclusion 2023, we uphold our hands to pray gratefully to thank on your infinite favor to us till we can live in peace and harmony to perform our tasks as your servant. Ya Allah, we ask your blessing to make these occasions in success. Allahumma ya salam, ya mu'min, ya muhaimin, praise be to Allah, Lord of the universe. Ya Allah, we seek of you the means of your mercy, the means of your forgiveness, the protection from all mistakes, the benefits from all virtue, and the freedom from all sins. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adzabannar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Thank you, Dr. Muslim. Next, we would like to present a corporate video from the Faculty of Human Development, UPSI. Thank you, technical team. Ladies and gentlemen, our event for today would not be complete without being entertained with any performances. Therefore, I would like to invite the Bitara UPSI community-based rehabilitation trainees to entertain us with their performance. Please welcome Bitara UPSI community-based rehabilitation trainees.
Indah tersusun, tangan dihayun, kaki melangkah, mengikut rentak, cantik dan anggun, senyum menguntung, gadis Melayu, rancak bertanda. Tampan perkasa, langkah pemuda, menyusun gerak, pencak berseri, menjeling darah di ekor mata, terpaut rasa oi dalam hati.
Alun beralun, hai menuju alun, irama hati dan sejarah. Janganlah canggung, hai untuk mengalun, lagu rasa filter yang terindah. Ingat tak lagi janji kita dulu aspalela, kau dan aku akan bersama sampai ke hari tua. Tapi sayang janji itu dirampas orang ketiga. Oh aspalela, jangan buatku kecewa. Sampai hati kau pergi kepadanya, makan hatiku bila kau berkata patah hati. Dengan hubungan kita hancur hatiku aspalela. Terpisah kerana terpaksa akur desakan keluarga. Ku sedar bukan kehendakmu, tapi apakan daya. Ada tak lagi harapan untuk kita bersama. Oh aspalela, apa syarat pun ku terima. Sampai hati kau pergi kepadanya, makan hatiku bila kau berkata patah hati. Dengan hubungan kita hancur hatiku aspalela. Oh lela lela lela, oh 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 oh, lela lela lela, oh oh, lela lela lela, oh 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 oh, lela lela lela. Ada tak lagi peluang kita untuk bersama. Oh aspalela, jangan tinggalkan ku sayang. Sampai hati kau pergi kepadanya, makan hatiku bila kau berkata patah hati. Dengan hubungan kita hancur hatiku aspalela. Lela lela,
Thank you so much, Bitara UPSI community-based rehabilitation trainees, for the great performance. So, ladies and gentlemen, how do you feel about the performance? It was great? Okay. Okay, so distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, next would be the presentation of souvenirs. With that, once again, I would like to invite the head of Department of Special Education, Dr. Kwe Ang Ho, accompanied by the program director, Dr. Nurbita Binti Abdul Aziz, to step forward. Additionally, I kindly request all esteemed guests to remain in the forefront for the photography session later, following the presentation of the token of appreciation from our team. Okay, music tak ada. Tak ada music. Okay. UPSI pleasantly appreciates the presence of Professor Jennifer Smith Mary for gracing today's ceremony. Therefore, I would like to invite Dr. Kwe Ang Ho to present our token of appreciation to Professor Jennifer. Please welcome Professor Jennifer. Ladies and gentlemen, our program of the day would not be possible without the participation of Dr. Iqmal Hisham. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Iqmal Hisham to receive the token of appreciation from our team. UPSI cordially wishes to thank Professor Dr. Ruzita binti Muhammad Amin for her presence to witness today's ceremony. Therefore, I would like to invite Dr. Kwe Ang Ho to present our token of appreciation to Professor Dr. Ruzita. Finally, we would also like to invite Mr. Muhammad Shafiq bin Muhammad Zaini as a representative of Bitara UPSI community-based rehabilitation trainee to come forward to receive the token of appreciation from our team. Tunggu dulu. Stay. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. Thank you very much to all guests. You may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, as we bring the opening ceremony to a close, I kindly request for the participants to come forward for the photography session with our esteemed invited speakers and VVIP. No, just here. Okay, participants, please stand up and stand behind of the VVIP. remove tu kerusi. Remove kerusi. Remove kerusi. Kerusi remove. It's okay. Okay. With this, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, our ceremony has come to its end. Once again, thank you for gracing the opening ceremony with your presence. We kindly request for all participants not to leave this room as this event will be continued with our objectives of the day, featuring Professor Jennifer, Professor Dr. Rosita, and Dr. Iqmal Hisham. Thank you and have a good day. All participants are given 5 minutes to settle down before we head to the next sharing session. Thank you. the seats in front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the long-awaited moment of our program. After this, we will continue with enlightening presentations on two important topics: disability policy progress, lesson learned from a New South Wales perspective, and disability inclusion policy in higher education, lessons learned from Malaysia perspective by two great speakers. For your information, the Q&A session will be held after each speaker sums up their sharing. So this means we will have two separate Q&A sessions as whole. Therefore, I will respectfully invite all participants to submit their questions regarding our topic today to our distinguished guests during the Q&A session later. Rest assured, we will make every effort to engage in a comprehensive discussion regarding the questions raised. Before we proceed with our event program of the day, I would like to give a little introduction about our first speaker. Professor Jen is a professor of health and social policy in the Sydney School of Health Sciences. She is also the director of Centre for Disability Research and Policy. Her field focuses on creating practical research-informed policy and practice development in partnership with government and non-government organizations. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Jennifer to deliver an insightful discourse on the topic of disability policy development, lessons learned from a New South Wales perspective. Please welcome Professor Jennifer.
Can you turn the lights off the front so they can see? Yeah. Will you click it? That's fine. Just say okay. It just means that. It's okay. The slide should work fine. There we go. Hi, everyone. Oh, is that on? Yes, okay. Thank you very much. It's a great honour to be speaking here today and to be joining you. I'm going to be talking about disability policy in Australia. Now, normally when I start to talk about policy, I can see people's eyes glaze over and they think it's really not going to be very exciting. But I think disability policy is really important because it connects the research we do and the things that we see on the ground in the work that we do with people that are going to make a difference in terms of making change across an area or across the nation. I can hold it if you want. Yeah. I could use the handheld one. No, you're okay?
Okay.
It's all. Thank you. Yep, that's working. Yes. Okay, thank you. That's better. Then I can see the slides as well, and I can walk around, which I always end up doing when I'm teaching. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to start by talking just a little bit about me, and then my favourite topic about me, and then I'm going to talk about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is our major Australian disability policy, and then I'm going to talk about policy inclusion, how we get the voices of people with disability into policy. So I am a policy researcher by background. I'm not a clinician, so I don't have that practical knowledge of working with people with disability. But what I do have is a deep understanding of the way that policy is formed and the way that people's knowledge comes to impact policy. I think the things that I'm really interested in are when governments make policy up at the level of government, what actually happens in the filtering down to what we do or see on the ground and in the lives of people with disability. So what difference is that policy actually making? Because often you have a great policy idea and then when it becomes reality, it looks a little bit different, and sometimes it can have really unintended negative impacts. Now the real art as people working within universities or people working in the ground is then to try and talk to government in a way where you transmit what's gone wrong in a way that's going to be sensitive to the sort of political things that are happening within the government and how, but still draw attention to real impacts for people with disability themselves. I'm also really interested in the way that the knowledge from all of us on the ground working with people with disability and people with disability themselves gets up into policy. So how do we get policymakers to really listen to what is happening in practice and to cut through all of the political things that happen at a policy level, or to harness the political things that are happening at a policy level in order to make change happen? So today I'm going to talk about the National Disability Insurance Scheme mainly, which is a very significant disability policy for Australia. Next slide, please. But first I just wanted to explain the situation in Australia because it makes disability policy quite complex. So we've got 3 levels of government in Australia, and I'm sure that if you tried to explain the Malaysian, system of government to me, I think I would find it very difficult to work out as well. But we have 3 levels of government and all of them have responsibility for disability in some sort of way. So the federal government is based in Canberra, not Sydney. Everyone thinks the capital of Australia is Sydney, and Sydney is the most beautiful place in Australia, so please come visit us. The federal government in Canberra makes policy. It makes some areas of policy set out under our constitution. Anything that is not mentioned in the Constitution is then made by states, but the government wants to make what happens to people with disability unified across the country. So we don't want people in one state or another having better, we're all Australians, so we should all have a similar access to supports. And that's a difficult thing when you have 7 states and territories. So often what the federal government tries to do is it tries to create disability policy and then get all of the states and territories to sign on to it. So the federal government funds some aspects of disability support. So it funds the National Disability Insurance Scheme, it funds the Disability Support Pension, which a lot of people with disability receive. It's a low, very low amount that they will receive in support weekly or fortnightly. But the states and territory governments, they have a broader remit in terms of disability. And then the local councils, they're more interested in like accessibility of public services. So trains, buses, public buildings. So they've all got a say. Next, thank you. Next, sorry. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the disability policy context in Australia. So we have all of these different states and territories, and we have different disability policies within them. Above them all is Australia's disability strategy. That's what it's called. It's actually very difficult to use in a sentence because it's got it's a very difficult thing to explain, but it's 2021 to 2031, so this is a new policy, and it's meant to cover disability strategy across the whole country. And in order to do that, it has to have that sign-on from all states and territories. And what we've done wrong in the past with disability policy is that we have a policy, we have a national disability policy, but we don't have any actions to implement it. So it's like a statement of what we might want to do, but we don't have to do anything with it. So really, really important within this policy is the implementation plan. And that implementation plan will identify people or areas that are responsible for implementation, and then what they have to do in order to show that they have implemented the policy. And that makes for a much more effective policy. We hope. We haven't seen much implementation yet. Then we have the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is a national scheme that I'll talk about in a minute. In New South Wales, we have legislation called the Disability Inclusion Act. Now, that legislation doesn't force particular actions on areas or agencies, but it forces areas to care about disability. So it forces them to come up with a disability inclusion plan. It's a good strategy because what it does is it says that local areas basically get to come up with a plan, and then they get to monitor themselves for implementation. It's a much better strategy than areas that are sitting above them coming up with a plan, because then those agencies, and when I'm talking about agencies, they can be like the Education Department, the Transport Department, the Ministry of Health. They have to come up with these inclusion plans where they set their own targets and then monitor them. And also all of the local councils have to come up with plans as well. So that filters that policy down. And because it's legislated, it means that all areas have to do it. They're forced to do it, and they're forced to report on it. So it's a soft policy in that the government doesn't mandate particular things, but it's hard policy because it forces them to report on it. We also then have the Disability Discrimination Act, and the Disability Discrimination Act forces that particular actions in order to ensure the inclusion of people with disability in employment and education and a range of other public services and public goods. And we have education, employment policies and legislation, etc. But I'll talk about that more this afternoon. Next slide. I'm not going to read all of them, but what I want to show is that when we're researching or working with the sector, we're looking for policy opportunities. So we're mapping the landscape of policy opportunities to go, okay, where can we hook our knowledge into? Where, as researchers, can we make a difference to policy? So later on today in the session this afternoon, I'll talk about my centre, which is the Centre for Disability Research and Policy. Now, our aim is to impact government policy and to impact services. So we look at something like this and we think, this is a list of opportunities for us to make a difference. And then we think about what knowledge do we need to make that difference. This is the National Disability Strategy, Australia's Disability Strategy, and the different outcome areas. They focus on employment and financial security, inclusive homes and communities, safety, rights and justice, personal and community support, education and learning, health and well-being and community attitudes. So they're the outcome areas that the government has to report on in relation to this policy. And those areas were prioritised during a long consultation process with the sector, with people with disability and academics. These are targeted action plans. So these are about things where we're really trying to focus on action outcomes. So they are employment, community attitudes, early childhood safety and emergency management. So in Australia we have a lot of natural disasters, and often people with disability miss out or suffer poorer consequences during those natural disasters. Next slide, please. We've also had a Disability Royal Commission going for the last 5 years. So this Royal Commission is a national legislated commission. It's called Royal because the former Queen set it up. And it has very high legal status. So I was, for example, as a researcher, I was subpoenaed to give evidence in relation to this, and my university was subpoenaed to give evidence in relation to it. So as a Royal Commission, it has it's very, very strong in what it can force people to give information on. So for example, our university had to audit every single course that we give, and we had to list what disability competencies our health and dental students received as part of their education. The aim of that was the Disability Royal Commission was focusing on violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disabilities. So that neglect part of it, they took up in relation to health and the health system. So was the health system neglecting the needs of people with disability? These key themes are really important. So choice and control. This idea of choice and control runs through all of our disability policy in Australia, and it's about trying to say, okay, people with disability other people have made decisions on their behalf for a long time, so we need to have that as the top of our mind. We need to think about choice and control. Other areas that they focused on were restrictive practices, attitudes in the population, segregation and exclusion, advocacy and representation, and oversight and complaints. So how were people actually able to complain about poor treatment? And even though we've got a Disability Discrimination Act, it's not something that often people with disability themselves, unless they're already empowered, are using well. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. I'll just pass over that. It was just basically a holding slide to tell you about the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It's a really interesting scheme, and if I wasn't in Australia, I'd want to find out about it. It's a very complex scheme, so I apologise now if I'm talking about it and you have a lot of questions. So please use the Q&A to ask me any questions you have about this scheme. I became an expert on this scheme not because I knew everything about it, but because I knew anything about it. It's a scheme that was developed and is very complex to get your head around, because it's actually really new in the Australian landscape, but probably in the international landscape as well. So the National Disability Insurance Scheme, it's important to underline that it's not a welfare system, it's an insurance scheme. So it comes about because the government goes, every one of us may or may not have a disability in our lifetime. So therefore, it's a public insurance scheme that we will pay for through our taxes, and it means that we can then draw on it in our lifetime if we need to. So it's this idea that disability isn't just something that happens to the people that have disability already, it's a shared community issue. Disability is something that we all share, whether we have it or not currently. And it's designed to help people to improve their independence and community inclusion, and to have choice and control about what happens to them. Now, interestingly, so this is the requirements. So if you you can be an eligible participant if you have a significant disability. That's not written in here, but it has to be a significant disability. And it has to be a disability that you'll have for your lifetime. So it can't be a transient disability, for example, from a broken leg or something like that, that you will then get better from, because that's a rehabilitation issue that's dealt with in the health system. I'm underlining here because these are the areas that it covers: intellectual, cognitive, neurological, sensory or physical impairments, or a psychiatric condition. That's an interesting inclusion because many disability policies do not include severe mental illness, disabling mental illness in their policies. Now, if you are found to be eligible, you're assessed in terms of what you need to live this independent life. And then you're given a personal budget which you can spend in a disability marketplace. So you can take your budget and you can spend it in approved services. So services that are registered under the NDIS, you can spend that money. So you're given a budget, say, that says you need this much community support, you need this much for independent living, you need this much for getting out and about or employment supports. So this replaced a previous system. So we used to have a system of block funding where the government gave money to organisations to provide services for a particular group. So they might say, okay, you provide daycare services or respite for a particular group in this particular area. And it was normally money that went to charitable organisations to do that. So it removed block funding and it moved to individual funding. So if you then serve someone a respite service, then you get money from their budget as a service provider. It's a trickier model for service providers because it means that they have to be quite sure that they're going to get enough people for a given service to be able to provide that service. So that's been difficult for the sector to deal with. So these are the objectives of the scheme. So I talked before about independence, but it's also about social and economic participation. So the idea is that this is a very expensive scheme, but that through involving more people with disability in the community, we're going to be able to increase the performance of our national economy. Because we're not then having people who are excluded, they're excluded from spending money within our economy because they're not making money within our economy as well. And the creation of the new services is also meant to stimulate the economy. So even though it's expensive, it's meant to be giving back to the economy. I talked before about choice and control and this idea of a nationally consistent approach so that everyone in Australia gets access to the same supports. Next slide, thank you. I don't know if I can click on this because I think this is what was making the security thing pop up before. So can you, yeah, I think we might just skip over it. But there's a lot of videos online where you can look at what people actually get under the NDIS. And I think that's quite useful to look up because you can actually get an idea of the supports that people are giving. But they can be individual or group-based supports. So if I was someone with disability and I wanted to get out in the community, I could use my budget in order to engage someone to take me out on outings. So, for example, if I was really into comics, I could say, I want to go to this comic fair in Sydney, will you take me? And then that would employ someone that in your budget to take you to the comic fair and hang out with you and take you home. Similarly, if I wanted to do a group cooking course, I could say I want to be part of this group cooking course, and an organisation that was running it would then take the money from my individual budget to do that. It also provides like personal care services, so showering for people with physical impairments using wheelchairs. It would enable them to upgrade their equipment as well, so to have higher level accessibility equipment. So it also funds equipment. Next slide, please. Oh, this is another video, but anyway, what it shows is that there are supports for employment as well. So it gives you funding in order to access employment. So it won't provide funding supports for your employer, for example, but it will, which is actually funded through a different system, and I'll talk about that later today. But this is, it does fund you to access employment. So here's some key statistics. So these are the big statistics. Okay, so it was implemented in 2013. It was gradually rolled out, and it's been rolled out across Australia for about 3 years now. So it was gradually rolled out, was done in trial sites, and then it was rolled out further. It's funded through general taxation. So when it was introduced, there was a 2% increase in general taxation to the whole population to fund the scheme. That was completely uncontroversial. There was no issue with it. So everyone was sort of behind the scheme. But it was at a moment where there was sort of general national prosperity at that time. So it was not seen as a big drain on the population. It was also introduced at a time when we'd had the same government for 20 years, and when that government left, the new government was looking around for big policy ideas, and this came out of a national summit that was held then. So this was the big policy idea for the new government. So it was really taken up as a big national expenditure. There are 535,000 participants across Australia. And that's compared to 4.4 million with disability, but 2.4 million under the age of 65. Only people under the age of 65 are eligible to enter the scheme, but if you enter the scheme prior to being 65, you can keep on the scheme. Now, this has been a problem because what you get under the aged care system in Australia is much worse than you get under the NDIS. So they're not having people leave the scheme, which is pushing up costs to the scheme. Of the participants, 30% have autism, around 20% have an intellectual disability, and around 9% have a mental illness that is considered to be disabling. It is expected to cost $50 billion annually by 24-25. So that's 155 billion in your currency, so it's a big national expenditure. It is bigger than our entire annual defence budget in Australia, and it is bigger than the national expenditure on public health. The public health, like not all of our health system, but the bit that you access for free when you go to the doctor. So this has caused big headlines. This is big headlines, particularly this bit, bigger than defence, okay? For some reason, no one made that connection until this year, but since they did, it's become very big news. Now, that puts the scheme under threat because the scheme is excellent for people with disability. So at the moment, it's under a review. The review won't say that it shouldn't be there, but it will deal with some of the problems with the scheme. One of the problems is this figure with autism. These are mainly young men under the age of 18. So 50% of the scheme is under the age of 18, and most of them are young men with autism. This is a problem not because people with autism shouldn't be on the scheme, but because other areas of government should be addressing the needs of this group. Also, there's been an incredibly high raise in the number of people with autism in Australia as a result of the scheme, of higher level autism. So we used to have, under the scheme guidelines, there's 2 levels of autism. Level 1, you don't get into the scheme, you just get general supports. Level 2, you get into the scheme. We have no one with level 1 autism anymore. So the scheme is driving diagnosis, and it's driving that because of what you get on the scheme. Next slide, please. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this before. The average personal budget is 68,000 Australian dollars. And this is a utilisation figure. So this is, if you get a budget, how much of it are you using? So not everyone uses their budget, and it's an indicator of equity. The highest expenses are for those in supported independent living, so they're living out of their home, living in accommodation, and they will often have annual budgets in excess of 250,000 Australian dollars. That's often for people with very high behavioural support needs, so they need one-on-one or two-on-one staff to support them. I talked before about the creation of the disability support market. So in Australia, in New South Wales, for example, we have 4,000 disability service providers, and they can be both for-profit or non-profit. Previously, it's been mainly for-profit, not-for-profit providers or government providers. We don't have any government providers anymore. So one of the issues with the NDIS, and I just wanted to talk about this because, as I said when I started, policy can be implemented from an idea, and this was implemented from an idea. But when you come to implement it in practice, the idea, well, it never corresponds with reality. So then the thing you need to do is to try and point out where it's not corresponding with reality and where those impacts are having the most negative impact. So sometimes the fact that it doesn't correspond with what you thought is fine, but it's where it leads to inequity or negative things actually happening to people that you need to address it. And there's a fine art to doing that. So as in Australia, the NDIS talks about this idea of reasonable and necessary supports for an individual to live a meaningful life on an equal basis with other Australians. And this is one of the main ways that Australia fulfills its requirements under the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. Under that convention, rights should be equitable, so there shouldn't be some groups of people with disability having rights over other people with disability. But we're questioning whether the scheme is actually equitable across participants. Here's a map here of, just to give you some idea of participant spread. So this is a map of New South Wales, and these are participants with mental illness. So this is the Sydney area, just zooming in on this area here. But most people with mental illness are actually not living in the Sydney area. They're living in a sort of semi-regional area in New South Wales. It looks like no one lives out here. No one lives out here anyway. So this is not. There's not very many people. I think there's maybe a town there, but that population. It's not that there's no one with mental illness living out there. It's just no one is living there. But the problem is that the NDIS actually works best for people in this area of Sydney. The rest of this area, they don't receive such good support. And the reason is because if you've got a market-based system, you need people. So if you're a service, your service needs to have people to provide services to. So if you've got very specific needs, say very high behavioural support needs, it's easier for a service provider to operate in Sydney, where it has a big enough market. But out in these areas where there's probably, one or two people with that actual need, the market doesn't operate because there's no services will come in to fix it. So this is a problem with the market-based model that we've taken up. It's not equitable in terms of spread. The other issue is that because of the big funding for the scheme, the general raise in taxation was not enough to fund the scheme. So we had to close down programs to fund the scheme. So we closed down, for example, these are 3 mental illness programs. So a lot of my work focuses on mental illness, so this is why I'm focused on this. These were really good and important programs. They were closed down to fund the NDIS with the idea that all of those participants would go into the NDIS. But what we found was actually only about 50% of them went into the NDIS. So what that meant was that those people were left without any services, whereas they'd been receiving services in the past. And we also find that access to the NDIS is more likely for people that live in affluent areas and people who have parental support or family support to assist them. And that's because it's a very, very confusing scheme to work with. So this means that it's not an equitable scheme. So it isn't fulfilling that initial requirement. So that means that many people receive less than they did before. Now, the scheme was actually designed with 2 tiers. So that 535,000 of people who needed the most support was meant to be accompanied by a second tier that was for general community supports. So I have a child with disability, and he would never be eligible for the top tier of supports because his needs are not significant enough. But he should be able to get supports under the general community supports. But that has not been implemented because the other one was so expensive and so big to implement that they sort of forgot about the other one. So that's a problem for us because, so for example, the occupational therapist that he sees, they doubled their prices because now they're getting funding from the NDIS, which has a much higher price than you would pay generally as a parent in the community. So there's a knock-on support that means that we have the best system in the world, but only for 1/5 of people with disability in Australia. And the rest are, you know, they're probably not as acutely needy as that group, but they still have significant needs that need to be met and in the past have been met. Oh, sorry, go back. I'm just going to point more. What it also means is that there's this idea that it's the only boat in the ocean. So we don't want a policy that is the only boat in the ocean. We don't want something. So that's the idea that the NDIS as a policy is the boat that's holding people. They don't want to leave it because then they'll be floundering in the ocean. Everyone is desperate to get onto it, but if everyone gets onto it, then it becomes swamped because it's hugely expensive and it becomes a problem for the government. So we need to, you can't ever have a policy that is so good and then nothing else around it, because it means that you end up with thousands of appeals around people's accessibility, and it means that people are very desperate to hang on to it and you can't actually change it very well. Because another issue is around carers and community. So previously there were a lot of programs that were directed specifically at carers and the communities around people with disability. If you move to a personal budget, which is just funding the individual's support needs, it can't provide funding to individuals' carers. And where people used to get care from their families, that care has now become outsourced through service providers. So you're not getting that care for the family. And that's been very disappointing for carers, I think, to miss out and not be recognised. As I mentioned before, it's also difficult for services to fund supports. So it's difficult for them to to budget and fund supports. And a lot of the traditional disability service providers have actually left the NDIS provision because it's too difficult for them to fund it. They also, because it's an individual budget, they can't afford things like upskilling their staff or sort of overheads for their organisation because everything is based on that individual. Okay, next. Thank you. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I just wanted to point out that complexity is a problem. So people with significant complex needs are less likely to get support from the scheme. And that's because their needs are layered, like they, in rural areas, so you've got this layering in rural areas of disability plus distance, plus a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live in those areas which have particular cultural needs that must be met. Those types of layering of complexities mean that that group is often not likely to find services that are supportive of them. So what it means is that people with more complex needs are less likely to be served by the scheme. That's not what we want. We want the people with the most complex needs to be most supported by the scheme. And I think there's this failure in Australia to deal with the fact that not everyone lives in a capital city, which is sort of blows my mind because Australia is so big. Like when you fly over it, you think, there's no one down here and I've been flying for hours. And, you know, I think that we forget about that. We forget that actually people live in those areas and we don't design policy for that group. Next slide, thanks. So one of the ways that we've been trying to measure equity is by looking at plan utilisation. So I said before the average plan utilisation is 74%, but for people with more complex needs and mental illness, the utilisation is much lower. So they'll on average be only using half of their plans because there's nowhere else for them to spend that money on. And if you live in far west New South Wales, for example, you only use an average of 11%, and that's because there's no market out there for you to spend your budget on, basically, because of your cultural needs or your physical location or the complexity of your needs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the key issues are around market design. So the market, because service providers want to lower their costs so that they can provide services, it means that they often cut corners on things like the wages of employees. Obviously, they have to pay the minimum wage in Australia, but they won't get people who are trained. So we want people who are trained in disability, because otherwise they're not going to know what to do effectively. But actually I know I talked before about not having qualifications in disability, but I could go and provide services under the NDIS. So could my husband, who's a photographer and has never had anything to do with people with disability except for our son. So they're the people that can be employed under the NDIS. There's no qualifications that are needed, and that's significantly problematic because it means that people are maybe not getting the services that are adequate. Cross-sector collaboration is an issue. If you're just getting funded as a service for the service that you're providing at that time, then you don't have anything in your budget to spend on collaborating with other services. But for people with complex needs, that collaboration is essential, because you're not going to get them to live independently or have an independent life unless you, or a meaningful or included life, unless you collaborate with other services. And what it's actually seen is that for people with very complex needs, they're ending up in hospital, which is much more expensive, or they're ending in jail, which is very, very expensive because people, their services are not collaborating to make sure that they're not falling through the cracks, they're not going into problematic situations. And a lack of oversight. So we have this big distributed service sector, but a very poor lack of oversight by the government because they've gone with the, oh, well, the market can work itself out. The market can fill the gaps. A lot of the original the original government departments that we had for disability were shut down when the NDIS started because there was the idea that the NDIS would do everything related to disability. So in New South Wales, we had a Department of Ageing and Home Care that was completely closed down, so that we lacked this oversight that connect up services for people when they really needed. Next slide, please. So what are the solutions? It's really important for me as a policy researcher to be able to try and develop solutions that are going to be useful for government. The government doesn't want to hear again and again the problems. So I could tell them again and again these problems. They don't want to know about that. They want to know about what the solutions are. But a lot of academic research actually just focuses on problems rather than solutions. And that's because the solutions are the difficult bit. If they were easy, the government would have worked it out already. So it takes time, and you really need to think about, and you need to have collaborations like this, you know, coming and talking to you today to find out what is happening here. That's part of coming up with solutions because it gives you a perspective. You can't get the perspective just through looking at yourself all the time. You have to be talking to others. One of the solutions for complexity that has been added is these add-ons for really complex needs where they'll go, okay, well, we're going to have this group that works out those really complex needs situations. Those add-ons work well, but they're always add-ons, so you always need to be going to them. They need to be added on for everything. And that means that the system itself is still unstable. You're just trying to fix the gaps. What we want is a system that is actually dealing with this group without having to create add-ons. Then another one is market design. So you actually can design markets so they better support people with disability who have particular needs. So one of the ways of doing that is through providing higher funding for people with particular support needs that you know are not being met. So people with behavioural support needs, you could have a much higher funding for that the government uses. And then funding mechanisms where you can sort of buy people out of trouble. Now this is really important, this data and outcomes. It might surprise you to know that we actually don't know much about the outcomes of people on the NDIS. We don't track whether they're living a more independent life. We don't track what the outcomes are. Are they in better housing? Are they in better accommodation? We're just spending this huge amount of money. We don't know where it's going. So that's a really significant issue. So what we're doing now is working with the government to try and develop some of those outcomes measures. So I've got recently been awarded a fellowship for the next 5 years to work on the NDIS and people with mental illness in collaboration with the NDIS. And one of the aims of that is to develop some meaningful outcomes, to pool the government data that's already there in order to go, okay, well, where are people going? What's their outcomes? Is it actually leading to them having less hospital stays and that type of thing? Next slide, please. Okay, so I've talked about the NDIS. Hold your questions on that. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about participation and dignity in terms of the voices of people with disability. Okay, next slide. Keeping you on your toes. So we all know that there's been a history of practices which is ongoing that people with disability have been excluded or stigmatised in our communities. And that means that it's difficult to hear the voices and experiences of people with disability because they're always, it's always done against that backdrop. So there's systematic practices. So, for example, putting people, pardon me, with mental illness into institutions is still an ongoing practice that excludes their voices. So the ways that the system operates still exclude people's voices, but voice is really essential for people living an included life and for our policies to actually meet the needs of people with disability. What it means is that also that people with disability themselves lack an understanding of the validity of their own voice. That means that people won't speak up and there won't be like this collective understanding of their experiences that is helpful to governments in designing policy. Part of what we do as academics is try and harness that understanding, collect it, and then provide that voice to government. But we actually really need the government to listen to people with disability in a much more systematic way so that there's not that in-between, that people can speak their truths. Thanks. And why is that important? Okay, I'm going to talk you through this slide. You don't have to read all the numbers. I'm going to tell you what they mean. You can look at the colours. So we did a survey last year of about 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people in Australia, looking at priorities for disability research. It was directed at people with an interest in disability research. So we had the survey participants were people with disability, family and unpaid carers, paid providers of disability support services, advocacy and peak bodies, paid providers in other sectors, so teachers, for example, working in education, providing services for people with disability, academics, me, government employees, policymakers. And then here, this is how they ranked what they were interested in research. So from 1 to 10, so this was all survey participants. So you can see that persons with disability, family and unpaid carers, paid providers, advocacy and peak bodies, other paid providers in the other sector, academics, they all thought that one of the top research priorities was the design and operation of the NDIS. But what did the government put? 11. So what this shows, and this happens all the way down. So what it showed was the government was not actually very good at picking the priorities for disability research. So it means that government can't just decide things. And can't just decide things for themselves because they're going to pick the wrong things. Because they're going to be thinking from their internal government perspective. So that means that it's essential that you listen to, that you include these voices in policy making. Next slide, please. So these are the current practices that we use to include voices in policy and systems development. So a really common thing that we use is advisory committees. Advisory committees are great because you can go to these people, they know how policy works. They know how practice works. The problem is that they're often the same people again and again, and they can be used tokenistically. So government can go, oh, we talked to the advisory committee and then it's worked out. Some advisory committees are really, really good because they connect with their sector and they are well connected with the parts of government that are going to make a difference. But there are risks too. Employed experts by experience. So we, for example, in our centre, we employ people with disability in career development positions. That's because we think that within the next 5 to 10 years, our centre should be led by someone with disability who is a professor of disability research. So currently we employ people in postdoctoral positions in order to move them into positions of leadership in the next 5 years. Oops, you went back. So this is really important. Employing people with disability in organisations is really important for keeping them on track and aligned with what people with disability actually want. Structured consultation processes are useful when they're sort of really big, when they're big, valuable. They talk to a very wide range of people. They're also really good at getting people with disability to understand the value of their voice. And public forums and events, they're less useful, but they're good for understanding understanding sentiment. Policymakers, though, actually often struggle to genuinely hear the voices of people with disability because they find it they like people to be polite. And it's not that people with disability are rude, but it's just that if you're talking about the really significant negative impacts of systems, sometimes governments don't want to hear that. So it's difficult then to get that dialogue actually happening. Next slide, thank you. So this is my final slide, and it just summarises some of the things that have worked in our experience. So a lot of my research focuses on voice and voice in policy. But I think these are fundamental questions. We need to think about what is the value what is the value in inclusion? And we need to transmit that. We need to transmit that value because actually one of the reasons why governments don't consult is that they don't have any value in inclusion. And then what is our value of inclusion? What is the value of inclusion that we are transmitting in the actions that we do as well? I'm going to leave it there. I think there's one more slide here. Do you want to click through? Sorry. No, that's the workshop this afternoon. Go back to the previous one. Thank you. I'm going to end my presentation there, and please do ask me questions or talk about what's happening in Malaysia. Anything would be really helpful for me as well. Thank you. Do you want me to stand up here for
Q&A session.
Q&A? That might need to go to people in the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please you may ask our esteemed speaker now.
I've answered all the problems clearly.
Any questions?
Yes?
Yes.
Doing this.
All right. Prof. Jennifer Ikmal here. I'm interested when you're presenting about NDIS.
Yes.
And I know a lot of stories about the controversies surrounding the NDIS. And quite surprised me that the budget, 50 billion, is actually more than the Medicare and the defense, right? Mm-hmm. So how the Australian, especially on the government, the policies, balance the need of the austerity, the finance, and also the need for PWD in getting the insurance. What government had done to deal with the issues related to NDIS?
Yeah, so we've got a national review that's happening at the moment of the NDIS. It's actually aimed, it's done in the context of this debate about the cost of it, but the aim is actually to have it work better. So the aim is actually to deal with these problems of equity that I was talking about, and to deal with the fact that it's the only boat in the ocean, to try and think of what was it meant to do and what is it actually doing. Now, that debate around the cost complicates it because actually you can see the utilisation figures. If most people aren't utilising their budgets and you're trying to get people to utilise their budgets to really be included, that's going to cost more money. One of the things they're trying to do is there is fraud in the system, and there is poor practices in the system. If you have that many providers, there's going to be fraudulent actions. So they're bringing down that type of cost. The other thing that they want to do is to try and move off some of the younger people with disability, those people with autism, and move their support into the education system. So the education system was never meant to not do disability support anymore. But a lot of the supports that it used to provide through occupational therapy or physical therapies, for example, they've said, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. So the state governments have said, we're not going to do that anymore. So I think one of the things that they'll do, it'll just be cost shifting, but they'll move that back into the education system. Yeah. So I think that's what I think they'll do. Yeah.
What about the involvement of, let's say, private companies, multinational corporations in insurance and DIS?
So there are some So the question was about the involvement of multinational corporations. There are very large corporations that are providing support under the NDIS and making a very large amount of money from it. That's not what we intended to do with the NDIS. So one of the problems is the government set a price cap on the amount that it will pay per item. It was only meant to be a price cap. They were meant to compete and lower prices, but actually 98% provide services at the price cap. And that's because big multinational corporations are trying to use this as a cash cow. And people with disability shouldn't be a cash cow. They should be providing support. And because they're trying to get lots of money out of it, that means they're lowering those things like the training for staff with disability, that type of thing. Yeah, so it is problematic to have very large organisations, operating. Yep. You got a microphone? Rosita's got a question. Down the front.
Thank you, Jen. I'm so sorry I missed the first part of your presentation, but just wondering, catching whatever is that you have presented when I entered, you were highlighting that there are a few problems arising from the NDIS. I'm just wondering. I'm sure there were certain benefits that when you the country embarked on NDIS, there were certain objectives that they sought to achieve.
Yes.
Is it able to achieve any of those objectives? Despite all the issues that they are facing now?
I think definitely. So I think it's a great scheme, and I think you missed the bit where I talked about that. But I think that the big problem is, so I think that it is meeting its objectives. So, for example, now you see people with disability in the community, and you never saw them before. So people are out and they're involved in the community, and that type of inclusion breeds social inclusion, I think, just at a fundamental level. You're seeing more people in jobs and more people in employment. The problem is that we don't know because we're not collecting outcomes data. So that data is essential. We need that outcomes data in order to argue the success. So we keep saying the NDIS is cost effective. It might be costing 50 billion, but these people are in jobs, these people are living meaningful lives, that type of thing. But we're just saying that because we don't have the data at the moment. So part of what we need to do as advocates and activists is to really push for that data. And we see that research must do that. We must have those research skills to be able to bring together that data in order to tell policy the meaningfulness of the work. Mm-hmm.
Right. Any more questions?
One more.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. So I have 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, does NDIS accommodate people above 65?
It does, but only if they were in the scheme before 65. So older people are on the aged care support scheme in Australia, so they receive that scheme.
Okay, so the reason I asked for it is basically because I like the idea you presented at the initial stage of the presentation. You said anybody can be disabled, so for some of us that are not yet disabled. So bringing into the fact that, let's say, a 60-year-old person had been LD and probably at 61, he got involved in an accident and would need support. Okay, so that's why I asked for the age bracket.
Yeah.
So what's the package for people like that they've lived a healthy life before, but probably at a point in time in their lives they had to?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And it's sort of a point of real starkness. So if you were 66 and you became a quadriplegic in an accident, you would not receive the level of support that you would if you had had that accident before you were 65. And that's a significant area of inequity across the system as a whole. You know, as I showed at the start, there are 2 million people over the age of 65 with disability, but we still see this policy boundary of this, okay, 65, you're old, you know, you're old, you can go in the aged care system, you sort of deserve to have a disability because you're old, that type of thing.
Okay,
So,
if I'm clear with the NDIS scheme, now for this 60-year-old man, he had paid 2% extra on his tax.
yes.
So he should
does-
already have a budget.
Yeah.
So how come he does not have access to the money if it happens, say, he's 65?
Yeah, so it's not a personal insurance scheme. It's a public insurance scheme, which means that the money is pooled and it doesn't go to that person individually. It's not the type of insurance scheme, for example, that they have in Singapore. They have the Elder Shield Life or Care Shield Life, where you pay premiums and then you receive that money whenever you become disabled. It's a public insurance scheme, which means that you have to deal with those age cut-offs. But I agree with your point. It's for those people, it's devastating because they don't get the impact, the support that they do. I would say that actually, if you have a motor vehicle accident, you're still covered for whenever, because we have a separate insurance scheme for motor vehicle accidents as well.
Okay. So finally, I was thinking that policies like this, is it not possible, because it's really expensive and I know it's juicy for professionals. Now, is it not possible that professionals now pull out in helping less privileged and want to always work with the scheme? So probably you have more professionals enrolling into NDIS and less catering for other. Is that happening?
Yeah, no, it's not really. So it's a universal coverage scheme, much like our health coverage in Australia through Medicare. So it's not means tested. So yeah, depending on whether you were, I could get the same amount and I'm in a full-time job as someone who has never been in a full-time job and is sort of living in poverty. So I would get the same amount, yeah. There's a question down here too. Oh, sorry. There's one here and then at the back. Sorry.
Hello, Jane. Yes, I just wanted to get some information about and how NDIS, right? How it improved the employability scheme for the disabilities, employment ability.
Yeah, so it should, but again, we don't know. We don't keep that data. We don't know the participants and what their outcomes are. We do have in Australia, so one of the problems is that we have not had very accessible administrative data sets. So we do collect all that data. It's just almost impossible to link them up between the NDIS participant data and the government employment statistics data. But we have this new national system called the National Disability Data Asset. So basically all of the governments have come to an agreement that there are administrative data sets like housing, employment, criminal justice system, health, and NDIS, just as an example, that as researchers or providers, you can become a registered user on it and then you can get that data, de-identified data on participants that will help with actually understanding that question.
Is there any specific programs to in that scheme to promote the to increase the employment among the disabilities?
Well, they can get supports for employment, as I said, but the actual employment schemes sit outside of it. So there's the disability employment services that sit outside the schemes, and they're meant to be providing supports for people to find employment, and also things like wage subsidies for employers who employ people with disability, or other sort of job access things that cover, like if you need accessible equipment, that type of thing. Yeah.
Terima kasih. Thank you. Good morning, Prof. I'm Lily from the Ministry of Education. So I wonder, because you have been talking, it's actually important for government to listen to the people with disabilities in a systematic way. So what would you suggest? Because here in Malaysia, we can actually see that we have a senator with disabilities, of course, but then it seems like we are fighting, the small groups of people with disabilities are fighting for that. So the advocates, people with disabilities are fighting for their rights, something like that. So what should we do as the government or the policy maker to have this kind of systematic way to listen to these people? Another question is, because I like to hear when you say that the government wouldn't like to listen to the issues, problems every time when we present something. So what is the solutions? So I wonder whether you can share what have you had in mind, the solution to reduce or to tackle the issues of the NDIS. In Malaysia, if I can share, we have this bantuan now, with this new government is Bantuan Rahmah. Before this is One Malaysia. Some sort of bantuan or support, but I think it's based on economic background, not on disabilities or all sort of that. So yeah, that's a question. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that works well in terms of government support. So when I used to work in Scotland, I studied policy consultation in Scotland in order to look at how they were contributing. So one of the things that they did is that they had official government voice bodies. They were like disabled people's organisations, but the government had created them. Now they weren't as ground up as disabled people's organisations that come from the community, but because the government had created an environment. Sorry, thank you. Okay, that's a bit better. Because the government had created an environment that was well connected to policy, so that voice body, I think it was called Voices of Experience, it was part of the government sort of machinery. So the government knew who to talk to. This Voices of Experience group, they had connections with a lot of the disabled people's organisations, and then they could feed that knowledge up into government. So having that official part of government, I think, was effective. It's not, and in a way it sort of, it formats the voices of people with disability. I don't even know if I would like to say that, but it makes them easier to listen to from government. It shouldn't be that way, but I know from experience that government will often take a step back if they feel they're being attacked, from my experience of research. And so this sort of semi-autonomous government body that is led by and includes the voices of people with disability works well. Yeah. There was a question behind, yeah?
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jennifer. I really appreciate and I like your wonderful lecture. I have a couple of questions. The first thing, I'm Abdul Mujib Khan from Department of Psychology. I wanted to ask about the mental illnesses,
Yes.
like people, those who diagnose like serious mental disorders like schizophrenia. So what is the government policy for rehabilitation for them? What is the procedure in Australian government that they are process, number one. The second thing about the stigma of mental illnesses and disabilities, how is over the period of time, is it still there like in our societies in Asian, is still a huge stigma about mental illnesses. So I would like to ask your thoughts on these couple of questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. They're questions that are quite close to my heart because that's the area that I work in the most. So the NDIS is meant to support people with severe mental illness, so people with schizophrenia, people with significant mental illness. One of the problems we have is that the scheme is so difficult to enter that that group of people are not going into the scheme as they should. So it's much easier for you to go into the scheme if you're supported by your family who can fill out all the forms and get all the right stuff. But people with significant mental illness are not getting into the scheme. They should be getting support in the same way that anyone else is under the NDIS. Your second point about stigma, there is still significant stigma in Australia around those illnesses. There's been a lot of public health campaigns that have tried to overcome that type of stigma. I still think that there's a long way to go in terms of stigma around significant mental illness. I think that, interestingly, I was talking before about employment of experts by experience in the government and in organisations. The mental health sector has led the way with that. So they employ a lot of peer support workers, and that really helps with the development of confidence amongst people with mental illness that they're going to get better and they're going to be able to participate in the community. Because I think a lot of the thing that hold people back from utilising the NDIS for that group is that they think, well, there's nothing in it for me. I'm not going to get better. I'm not going to be able to get anything out of this scheme. Yeah.
All right, so the Q&A session will be over. So thank you, Professor Jen, for generously imparting your profound insights on the subject of disability policy development, lesson learned from a New South Wales perspective. Your contribution has been immensely valuable, so you may be seated.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so now, ladies and gentlemen, before welcoming our next esteemed speaker, let us warmly welcome the Dean of Faculty of Human Development, UPSI, Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Talib bin Muhammad Hashim, for the welcoming speech. Please welcome. Speech. Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Boleh. Banyak. Okey dah. Thank you. Tolok mata aku nampak. Right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Test. Pegang lah. Right. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed participants, thank you very much to all participants to come to here. A very warm and lively welcome to the International Symposium on Disabilities, Community Inclusion, organized with meticulous care by the Center on Disabilities and Community Inclusion at the Faculty of Human Development, University Pendidikan Sdn Idris. Today, we gather here to tackle one of the most crucial and pressing issues of our time, the inclusion of individuals with disabilities. First and foremost, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for gracing this occasion with your presence. Your unwavering commitment to promoting inclusivity, understanding and support of individuals with disability is truly commendable. Today, we have the power to make a profound difference in their lives and pave the way for a more equitable and inclusive society. Now let me introduce to our esteemed keynote speaker who will, it is our most pleasure for us to have Professor Jennifer Smith Mary. Give a big applause to her. From the prestigious University of Sydney, right? So, we are also privileged to have Professor Dr. Rosita, a distinguished figure from the esteemed International Islamic University of Malaysia. Joining us also another speaker who is Dr. Iqmal Hisham, a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University Technology Mara. Right. Moving forward from this symposium, basically we like to have to achieve a few things. First one, we will seek to raise awareness about policies concerning individuals with disabilities, or in Malaysia we call it OKU, orang kurang upaya, by understanding their significance and identifies areas for improvement. Secondly, hopefully from this symposium, we will provide a platform for sharing diverse perspectives and engaging in discussing on the existing OKU policy. Thirdly, we hope that from the team of disability policy and research, enabling critical examination and exploring to drive evidence-based practices, shape future policies, and create inclusive environments that empower individuals with disabilities to thrive. Lastly, we aimed to showcase various activities and initiatives within the OKU policies framework. By exploring innovative approaches and successful models, we can design and implement activities that promote inclusivity, empowerment, and equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities. This will amplify the voices of marginalized individuals and contribute to more inclusive and just society. Once again, I express my deepest appreciation for your unwavering commitment, dedication, and willingness to attend this symposium, especially from our friends and colleagues from the Ministries of Education and, of course, Ministries of Health Department, right? So we have also joined our symposium here, our friends from Kementerian Kesihatan, right? Okay. So finally, I wish you all a highly productive enlightenment and truly captivating experience throughout this symposium. Thank you very much. Definitely. We would like to have a good collaboration with all of you, because currently we have if you see out there, there are currently we have the what we call the PDK, Inclusive Center under development, because this one we have got the support from the MOF. So definitely, hopefully in future, we are trying to have what we call programs under inclusive and disabilities. So thank you very much and welcome to the symposium. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dr. Abdul Talib. Now, before welcoming our next esteemed speaker, once again, I would like to give a little introduction about our second speaker. Professor Dr. Ruzita binti Muhammad Amin is a professor of economics at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Not only that, she also serves as the head of Disability Services Unit, Office of Deputy Rector, Student Development and Community Engagement at the International Islamic University Malaysia. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Ruzita to deliver an insightful discourse on the topic of disability inclusion policy in higher education, lesson learned from Malaysia perspective. Please welcome Professor Dr. Ruzita.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to the Master of Ceremony, the esteemed Dean of Faculty of I think Human Capital, is it? All right, okay, Prof. Mat Amin. I should remember this because it's my father's name. So, right. Okay, Prof. Okay, and also other colleagues, our esteemed my fellow speakers, Professor Jen and Dr. Ikmal. Right. So it's always a pleasure, to be among very learned people, especially everybody also. Right. And I'm very privileged to be to be here today. Thank you so much to UPSI for inviting me today to this very auspicious event. Right, I think it is a very noble effort to actually start the continue discussing the issues on disabilities, which sometimes are considered to be not a very popular popular area of research. Okay, but I think this is a very important issue that we need to actually do research on, so that we can actually find solutions to the problems faced by people with disabilities, right? Okay, so I'm here today is actually basically just to share. Okay, I'm not an expert on the area of disability. I learn as a person with disability myself, and I also learn from my involvement in research, okay, in the area of disability, as well as my involvement as members of the National Council of Persons with Disabilities under the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development, and also as a member of the National Education Advisory Council under the Ministry of Education for the period of 2018 until 2020. Right, so based on my experiences in those areas, okay, as well as my own experiences, as well as my little training in economics, okay, right. So I try to share the experiences that we have in the area of disability inclusion policy in higher education itself. As was mentioned by the Master of Ceremony just now, I'm also currently the head of the Disability Services Unit in IIM. We have been in establishment since 2012. So basically, when we talk about disability inclusion, yeah? Okay. Right. So for Malaysia, we're talking actually about the rights to education or education for all, which is actually nothing new, right? So we try to actually, leapfrog, and try to be as good as Australia, and other developed countries, right, in terms of disability inclusion in education itself. Yeah. Now, when we talk about, I'm going to go through the development of disability inclusion policy in education as a whole, right? And then I will focus on the higher education, basically with respect to the drafting of the guidelines. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the guidelines for the implementation of disability inclusion policy in Malaysia, okay, which was actually drafted and launched in 2019, all right? I think that one is actually a turning point, in higher education in Malaysia in terms of disability inclusion, right? And then we can talk about the launching of the guidelines and as well as some issues, challenges in terms of, the whole process along the way, all right? So basically it's a sharing, okay? Sometimes happy stories, sometimes not so happy stories, okay? So when you talk about education for all, I think all of us know that Malaysia is a signatory, right, of international agreements, okay? Right, UNCRPD, okay, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Incheon Strategy for the Asia Pacific, right, and we also have the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and in Malaysia also we have developed said there was certain groups which require support. Okay, and then we have also the Incheon strategy. This will be for the, it's actually an outcome of the CRPD as well, but more for the Asia Pacific. It's called Make the Right Real for persons with disabilities in the Asian Pacific. There are 10 goals. Goal 5 talks about early intervention and education for children with disabilities. Yeah, so make the right real. So this one has got clear targets and so on. Yeah, next please. And of course our SDG, number 4, I think all of us are familiar with that, quality education and inclusivity, right? Next. And okay, so those are the agreements, international and national legislations that we have, right? Agreements and legislations that we have. And secondly, when we talk about education for all, we are actually quite fortunate in the sense that we inherit the British education system, right? So in the sense that, the opportunity for education actually started way before independence, okay? So in 1926, for instance, right, the St. Nicholas Special Education Primary School for the Blind was established by the Anglican Church, yeah, in Malacca, and later it moved to Penang. So that was the beginning of special education, way before independence, yeah? And of course now we have many more for different types of disabilities. And then, okay, this is the school, St. Nicholas School. Yeah, next. Okay, so and of course in lower education, we have the Malaysian Education Blueprint, okay, which charts out the strategies until 2025, and it actually highlights, okay, the importance of ensuring that students with specific needs including these students with disabilities. All right, they also get access to high quality education, just like other students. Yeah. Okay, and then also they will have we have 3 programs now. Next. Okay, and I think all of us are aware of this. Special education program is for special schools, yeah, and then special education integration program is where it's a mainstream school, but they have a special classroom, okay, to cater for students with disabilities. And then there's also the inclusive education program where the students with disabilities they can actually join the regular mainstream classes. Okay, there are 3 programs here. All right. So 2 actually segregated. Okay, only 1 is inclusive in the lower education. Right, and partly also it can create problems in terms of understanding. Because they are not children. Those are actually formative years where you would like them to actually interact with other children with disabilities so that they can understand better each other. They can learn about each other better. And the most important thing is it can create a lot of empathy. Okay, because now awareness is there. People know, they are aware that people with disabilities are around, but there is a lack of empathy, right? Empathy lacking right from the ground right up to the top sometimes, and that's where sometimes policy issues, starts to arise. Yeah. Okay, so next please. Okay, and then we move on to higher education. Yeah, and also for higher education, it is nothing new in Malaysia, right? So also in line with the national education philosophy, falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, kan? So when we talk about developing individuals in a holistic and integrated manner, so as to produce individuals who are intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, physically balanced and harmonious, based on a firm belief in and devotion to God, right? So this is the Malaysian national education policy. So it's also applicable to all students, including students with disabilities. They need to become balanced graduates, right? But when they enter the university, are they getting enough? Do they get the same access to everything, to all the facilities that can actually enable them to become balanced graduates? So that's another question that we need to ask. Yeah. Okay. So this is one. Next, please. So in early stages of independence, okay, not much infrastructure in place in universities. Many universities are very old. Okay, they were built way before universal design requirements are in place, right? For IIM, okay, International Islamic University, fortunately, they accepted students with disabilities right from the very day of establishment. In fact, I was one of them. I was the first batch. I'm not sure whether you can identify which one I was. The third one? Standing, sitting. Not really. Not me. It's a bonus question. Actually, I was standing. Because at that time, yeah, with the crutches. Okay, at that time, I could still walk. Okay, because I actually, just for your information, I was born okay, but I had polio when I was 1 year old. Okay, I had polio, so it causes paralysis. My legs, I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk. Even my arms are not that strong. So when I was young, I could still walk. Okay, of course, with a lot of limping. Eventually, as I get younger, so the doctor advised me that no. So it's time for you to stop walking because it's putting a lot of strain on the heart. So very, very typical polio cases. Apparently, people die of heart attacks. Because the heart has to work extra hard compared to other people when we force ourselves to walk. So okay, I have to follow the advice. So now I'm completely on wheelchair. Right. So and I need to use a motorized one because I'm a quadriplegic. Okay. So that's that was me over there. Okay. Right. So okay. So in a way, we are given the opportunity, right? Even though the facilities are not there yet, but they're good enough to open up the doors to actually allow students with disabilities to enter universities, right? And in cases where the facilities are not there, excellent students are actually sent abroad. One case in point, this is our late Prof. Dr. Ismail Saleh, a very esteemed economist, right? He's actually a blind professor, and he did his master's and PhD in the US and under the government scholarship. So I think it was a very good effort, right, on the part of the government to actually support, gifted, good students to pursue their studies further. Next, please. Okay, and of course, over time, okay, more and more students, they show, and they show excellent performance. Okay, so many get straight A's, 8 A's, 9 A's, 7 A's, right? And more and more of them actually starts to enter universities, right? So so you can see that in the pictures, right? And then more pictures here. So despite their difficulties that they face in school, they can still manage to excel, in academically. So more and more actually, qualify for admission to universities. Yeah? So that actually puts a pressure on the government in terms of, the kind of facilities, that, they need to actually provide, at the universities. Okay, next please. Okay. Right. Now, however, okay, despite that pressure, okay, unlike the Ministry of Education, they have a special department, right? Bagai Pendidikan Khas is a special education department, okay, where the department actually manages, the special education program. Again, they can provide advice on special education and so on. But but for the Ministry of Higher Education, they do not have that particularly dedicated unit, right, to actually implement policies or to monitor policies or even to advise the management in the ministry in terms of what is the best practices in terms of disability inclusion in higher education. So that actually create a lot of problems actually. Yeah. So next please. Okay. Right. So not only was there no dedicated department, okay, to support students with disabilities, okay, there is also no directive, no guideline at that time, okay, or disability inclusive policy that can actually govern the higher education institutions in Malaysia. Right, only in 2012. Okay, I'm not sure if any of us are familiar with that. In 2012, the Ministry of Higher Education actually came out with a directive, right? And this directive was actually sent to all Deputy Vice Chancellors, Student Affairs, right? And it is entitled on the implementation of the action plan to enhance teaching and learning for students with disabilities in all public universities. Somehow the title says phase 2, Fasa 2. I'm not sure when phase 1 came about, but the letter says phase 2. All right, so and we find that this is interesting that this directive came about 55 years after independence, right? All the way since independence, there was no directive at all. But yeah, good that at least now they came out with a directive. Okay? What the thing that triggered it? To me, I think it's basically the international agreements that we signed, the CRPD, right? We signed in 2008, okay, and then ratified in 2010, and this one came about in 2012. So it's about similar time where they find that okay, this is actually something that they have to take it up seriously. Okay, so at least the directive came, and I saw the document because as I mentioned, our disability service unit was set up in 2012 as well, right? But the reason was because not because of this directive, actually. The strange part is because we find that there are so many students in the university who have disabilities, and there are also few of us staff who are having disabilities. So we're saying, why don't we actually get together and then propose to the university to have this disability services unit? Because when I was abroad, when I was studying in the US, for my master's and PhD, every university has got a disability services unit. And even when I wanted to go abroad, they were very helpful. They found me the accessible house and accommodation. Many things they assisted. So we wanted that kind of support to have in our university. So we actually went to see the director at that time, and she actually liked the idea and was immediately approved, and we were set up. So and in order to set it up immediately, they appointed an academic administrator, so that would be me, because I was the one who brought the proposal together with the students, right? So in a way, so when we set up and we went to office, we were given this letter. So we we discovered this letter, this directive from the ministry, and it's actually a very comprehensive action plan. Okay? So as you can see, okay, the 4 strategic objectives. One is to focus on accessibility and support system for teaching and learning, okay, including the setting up of a disability services unit in every university, all right, which we didn't know. Okay, but we got lucky because we got set up. Okay, secondly, enhancement of quality of life. Thirdly, creation of disabled-friendly environment and services. And number 4, for career development programs for disabled students, right? So it's quite comprehensive, right? And in fact, there's also one component which states that they have already, Ministry of Higher Education has already established a division or department focusing on students with disabilities at that time. And I can still remember the officer in charge. His name was Pak Ali. Okay, but unfortunately, when Pak Ali retires, the unit retires together with him. So there was nobody manning it. You know, even when I called the ministry, they said that, oh, who's the new officer? Oh, we do not know who the new officer, and it just died down like that. You know. So now we find that there is no such unit anymore. Okay, at the ministry. Okay, that's quite unfortunate because at that time they were actually coordinating, you know, all the universities in terms of support. Okay, of course, not all universities have got the DSU yet, but they claim that, you know, they have it, but it's all parked under the welfare division. Okay, but you know how many students that welfare division have to cater for? Thousands, right? So it's quite difficult for them to actually support students with disabilities because our needs are actually quite specialized, right? You need to actually, give a more personalized attention to their needs. Okay, and that's why we need to have the DSU. Okay, next please. So since 2012 until 2018, right, 6 years later, we found that only 4 universities actually established the DSU, right? So us, UM was the first one. Then ourselves, IIM. Then USM also has got one. And then we have one private university, University of Nottingham. Okay, also has got a unit. Okay, disability unit. And surprisingly, many universities also, the management also did not know the existence of the directive. And sometimes also, this is true because when I during that time, I even asked some of the top ministry officials, sometimes in functions, I asked them, this about this directive, they're not aware of it. They're not aware of it. So it's very, very unfortunate that it is given directive like that without any monitoring in terms of implementation, without any reporting in terms of its progression. So it's such a waste. Okay? It's such a waste. So in a way, it's sort of died down on its own, right? So only a few actually has got the DSU. So how do I know that? Because I got appointed as one of the members of the National Education Advisory Council. And we had access. Okay, so I had access to information. So this is actually the National Education Advisory Council. The chairman is the late Tan Sri Wan Zahid. He was attached with UPSI online, right? Okay, right, and also the deputy chairman was Tan Sri Yong Po Kon. He's actually the owner of Selangor Computer. The composition is very interesting. You can see that we have Datin Azima is representative from which the parents group. Dr. Satina is educationist. Dr. Sukiman scientist. Okay, Major General Dr. Yusri is a military man. Okay, he's actually the commander of artillery group. Okay, but he's brought in to bring in leadership and so on. Okay, and then myself and then Datuk Mula, okay, on entrepreneurship. Ramanandan was a former teacher. Okay, a leader in the Teachers Association. Prof. Omar, okay, from UTM. Okay, scientist and also for in Islamic studies to review back the program, right? And then Prof. Ramza from UMS, okay, also the science area, okay, because they wanted to actually bring back STEM and so on. Okay, so this is our composition, right? So at the time, okay, we actually raised the issue during the meetings. Okay, next please. Okay, so okay. And I was actually the first one, the first disabled person to be appointed, okay, as a member of the National Education Advisory Council. We talk about the slogans, right? Nothing about us without us. Okay, so make the rights real. Okay, shouldn't just be slogans. We should actually walk the talk, right? So at least at that time, that was a representation from person with disabilities, But after our term ended, we didn't see any more representation in the new lineup, right? So we're not sure, where they are going in terms of the council, okay. But however, during our time, okay, next please. Okay, so we highlighted the lack of compliance with the directives, okay, and the members of the NAC were very surprised, okay, and we had also the Malaysia Education Blueprint for Higher Education, but there's no mention at all about students with disabilities in the education blueprint. All right, nothing, zero. Okay, so that's a little bit sad. All right, the next. Okay, so the NAC and the council decided that okay, this is a very important issue and we should present it to the minister. So we actually presented it to the minister, and in the report, okay, to the minister. Next, please. Okay, so the minister actually wanted for the guidelines for disability inclusive education to be produced. Okay, it's just the guidelines, okay, so that every university can come up with their own policies. All right, and he also realized that it might take time, if the ministry were to undertake the effort. So instead, the NAC, we were the ones who were asked to come up with the guidelines. Actually, there are three things that the minister wanted us to do. Number one is a cabinet paper. Number two is the blueprint for education for students with disabilities from preschool, from early intervention until tertiary level. And thirdly is this guidelines. Minister wanted us to do all three, but I said no, I don't think so, because it's administrative is actually the ministry's job. Okay, so but we take up the one, and actually we were lucky because at that time the Ministry of Education was merged with Ministry of Higher Education, so we actually had a hand in there. Okay, otherwise we also couldn't do anything much in terms of helping out disability inclusion in higher education, right? So we managed to do that. Okay, then I was appointed to chair the subcommittee, which we need to form. Okay, and Alhamdulillah, Major General Dato' Yusri, he volunteered to assist. Okay, and he became the co-chairman of our team. Until now, he is actually the advisor to our unit. So very, very active. Actually he wanted to come today, but he got to know last minute that it is actually a physical conference. Okay, so he thought it was online. Okay, the next. Okay, so the task now began. Okay, so what is the objective of this subcommittee? We wanted to come up with a credible guideline. Okay, and we want the minister to launch it, and during the launching, we want it to be handed over to the top management personally by the minister. Why? Because nobody can claim that they do not know about this policy. Right? So that was the idea. Right? That was the idea. So how do we come up with the credible guidelines? So in order to do that, we need to have a credible team, right? Credible committee. So we established our task force. Okay, we invited subject matter experts, on disabilities issues as well as persons with disabilities themselves. So next, please. And so this is the first part of the planning process. We assembled the team, in order for us to come up with a reputable guideline. Okay, next, please. So this is a team that we had, okay, a subcommittee or the working committee, chaired by myself and co-chaired by Major General Dato' Yusri. And then the members is very interesting actually. Okay, apart from the two of us as NEAC members, Dr. Hasna Toran, I think many of us know her. She's a lecturer currently now in UKM, but she's actually the founder and first director of Genius Kurnia, which is the first early intervention center for autism in Malaysia. Right? She herself has got 2 sons with autism. One quite moderate, the other one quite low functioning. Okay, and then we have Dr. Aizan Sofia, a lecturer from UKM, specializing in disability area. She herself is a person with disability, physically disabled because of bone cancer. She lost a leg. Right, and then Dr. Izawati, she is expert in universal design. Okay, she also has got a child, okay, with dyslexia and autism. Dr. Roslinda, she is non-disabled, but she's an expert in the area of disability management. She's currently in UiTM. Then Dr. Indawati is from UPM. Her area is in terms of employment of persons with disabilities. Dr. Naziati, she herself is she's a paraplegic. Okay, she's also a polio. What do you call it? I would want to call victim. Okay. For a polio survivor, yes, correct. Thank you. Okay, polio survivor, but she can still walk with one good leg. Okay, but she's an expert in universal design as well. Yeah, and Cik Firdaus, she's a blind person. Okay, but he's actually heading the disability unit in University of Malaya, right? And Fadullah was formerly with my office. Okay, he's also a person with disability, right? Managing students with different types of disabilities as well. So the composition there, is actually combining all the experts in subject matter area. So we actually sit together and develop this policy. Okay, next please. So the next thing that we need to plan out is how do we actually get everybody to have the common ground or interest. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is that we need to have our first meeting, okay, at a military camp. So we had an advantage at that time because Dato' Yusri was still serving and nobody else managed to go there, but we managed to go there, so it was quite exciting, right? And we had first class treatment, in the military base. It's amazing, all the assets, it's quite spotless, not a single dust. I'm quite amazed, right? But they were very, 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 very helpful, and we had our first meeting there, right? Together with the military men, okay? All right. So it was quite exciting, and it actually gave us a boost in terms of pushing and motivating us to push through this effort. Okay, next please. Right, so subsequently we actually met a lot of it at Permata Kurnia, apart from at the ministry itself. Okay, it's because we wanted to have that environment. Okay, this is where the children with autism, people with disabilities, parents are there. So we want to have that environment so that people are kept reminded and also motivated to continue with the task. Okay? So again, we have a few meetings there. Yeah, next please. At Genius Kurnia, very nice facility. Maybe you can visit, if you have time. Okay, and then of course we need to talk about the content of the guideline. Okay, number one, of course, we need to actually, promote for the establishment of disability services unit at every university, right? And not just under the welfare division, because it's very hard to support students with disabilities from there. It needs to be actually be directly under the Vice Chancellor's office, either the Vice Chancellor or the Deputy Vice Chancellor's office. Why? Because of the level of authority. So sometimes, in Malaysia, if we stop down, it is much easier to get things done rather than you try to move from the bottom up, especially in we talk about stigma in Australia, right? In Malaysia, is even bigger issue, all right? Because Australia is a quite developed country. Malaysia is, trying to get there. But, the level of stigma is still very, 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 very huge, I must say, right? So sometimes we have to actually maneuver around that, and try to make it work. And then secondly, the guideline to have is a strategic plan. Every university must come up with a strategic plan. Why? Because the first thing that when we proposed the idea, universities were very scared. When we actually proposed the idea, it was during the meeting of the Deputy Vice Chancellors. So the ministry, asked me to present the disability inclusion policy that we had in the university in IIUM, so that they have an idea what it's all about. But there seemed to be some resistance. Apparently, people are afraid that, it's going to be costly, to provide facilities, for people with disabilities. We don't have money to actually provide this and that, But my answer to them is that, yes, it's true, some facilities are difficult, costly, and may take time to get it done. But we are not expecting it to be done overnight. Okay, and that's why we need to have a strategic plan. And there is such a thing which we call reasonable accommodation, right? Reasonable adjustments where we can always, adjust. If the classroom is upstairs and there's no elevator or no lift, we can always adjust and have it downstairs, right? So if there's no if there's no accessible toilet, come on, out of 100 toilets in the university, we can't even renovate one toilet. That's too much, isn't it? So I think we can actually, accommodate, reasonable accommodation is actually something that we can actually implement, but many people are not aware of, But the funny thing was that, during that meeting, they didn't know that I was on wheelchair. When I arrived, the chairman at that time was in Unimap. Okay, he was a very nice person. The VC and the TNC, very nice person. But then when he saw me, wow, you're on wheelchair. Our meeting venue is upstairs, and there is no lift. I said, oh, okay. All right. So how do you propose now we find a solution to that? Then he was, discussed with a few of the organizers. Then he came back and said, oh, okay, it's okay. We have a room downstairs which they had prepared for lunch, So all the tables are there. So we're going to have your session first, okay, at downstairs. Then after you're done, then, we go back up. Okay, that's fine for me. They didn't realize that was reasonable accommodation. That was reasonable accommodation, So I highlighted to them, that is the thing that we are actually doing. You don't need to actually, build a lift overnight. But, be creative, find ways and means. And also I told them that, yes, a lot of things requires money, but also a lot of things does not require a single cent. In terms of support, in terms of changes in your procedures, all you need is a heart. All you need is a heart, I told them that. So, okay, they kept quiet. I hope it works, okay? So that's the challenge also, actually, the strategic plan. And then the third thing that we wanted to have in the guideline is the mindset transformation program, okay? This is, the reason why we wanted to have this is because of, we saw that there's a lack of empathy, right? As I mentioned just now, awareness is there, but empathy is lacking. So sometimes it's because of our own education system, that creates people who do not know, we do not know. Even for myself, if I'm not involved in the disability area, at the beginning, I also didn't know how to interact with people with disabilities. Imagine that. I didn't know how to interact with other people with disabilities because I'm not used to having friends with disabilities. Kekok, I don't know how to interact with them. So let alone other people who have no friends, who have no opportunities to interact, right? So this is the thing we need to actually, actually maybe revise a bit our education system, let some inclusivity happen, during the formative years, okay, so that they can actually learn. Yeah, all right. So mindset transformation program will be at all levels. So basically, this is we try to give DET, disability equality trainings, right? Disability awareness programs from the very top in the management in the university to the very bottom. So talk about academics, administrative officers, students, right, and even service providers. So we try to actually give training programs for them. All right, then the target date of completion, we set to finish it in 3 months' time, right? And we managed to keep it within the deadline. And next, please. So these are additional pictures. Okay, next, please. So this was the launching that we had, right? Launching that we had on 5th September in 2019, and we had it in IIUM, all right? And at that time, this was the during the orientation program, we call it Ta'aruf, for new students who came in, the orientation program. So that's why the the hall is filled up with students, new students, and this is a good time for us to actually expose them to disability, awareness and disability issues. So the minister came and launched the guidelines. Okay, all the top management of the ministry came, right, and we also invited students from the school in Batu Road to do performance, special education students. So, the dancing, on the stage, so the university students were enjoying it. So I think it was quite a grand affair, purposely done so that it captures the attention, because you have to make it visible. Because visibility is very important also in terms of if you make the issue visible, it can catch attention. And actually, we need a lot of support from everyone, not just people with disabilities fighting the cause, but we need advocates, from everybody. That's why, I'm very happy that you're having this symposium, because we are actually mobilizing everybody to be on board as well, right? So hopefully we can collaborate further, with the center and other programs as well. Yeah, so this was the launching. Okay. All right. So after 3 years, okay, 2022, okay, last year, we checked, okay, 20 universities have set up a DSU, Disability Services Unit, right? UiTM put it under the Vice Chancellors. So that's why they're very fast in terms of implementing. Kan Iqmal? Dr. Roshinda is doing a very excellent job, okay? My office is under the Deputy Vice Chancellor, delegated, but still okay. Right, but there are some who place it under the registrar's office, some still under the welfare office. Okay, so I think they need to relook into that so that it relates to effective implementation of the policies. Yeah? So next, please. Okay, so these are the challenges that I've mentioned just now. Okay, this is actually one very, very big challenge in Malaysia. Actually, we have a Person with Disabilities Act, but although it sounds like Americans with Disabilities Act, but it is nowhere near, okay, in terms of effectiveness. Americans with Disabilities Act, okay, it has got punitive measures attached to it. If you don't comply, you will be brought to court. You'll be sued, okay. But Akta OKU, Person with Disabilities Act, no, nobody can do anything. Okay, nobody can do anything, right? So, and it is actually overdue for review. Dr. Iqbal, you're one of the group, right? Need to push it through, right? And I heard that there will be some punitive element in there. Great. I think that will be, that will do wonders, inshallah. Sorry? Suggestion, yeah. We don't know exactly. Once it reaches the Aegis Chamber, I hope, kena sebab salah hajat ni. Okay, next please. So in fact, the current act, they even have clauses, Article 41 and 42 there, where, the government cannot be sued, even if they do not provide, So you can, it's clearly stated there. Clearly stated. You want us to do it, but at the same time, if you don't do it, it's okay. So so I think it's a bit of an irony there, because I think the government sector should actually be the role model, okay, where the private sector can actually emulate. Yeah. So I think this one has got to change, right? But I heard that there are other acts that will still cover them, right? But at least it will not be so blatant like this, lah. Right? So this is like, outright saying that, even if I don't do it, there won't be any repercussions on me, So I think that is quite irresponsible to have it here, I would think, right? So okay, hopefully this one will go, okay, when it is reviewed. Okay, next please. Yes, another thing is that, in Malaysia, okay, commitment from the top is very important, right? Political will, commitment from the top, right? So that's why, we actually use the NAC platform, right on, not right lah. I mean, we actually discussed with the minister at that time. We were lucky because the minister actually, has a very high empathy towards people with disability, because he himself, is involved with ideas and many other organizations. In fact, one time, when he caught me alone, he was telling me, Prof, please, let us do this. This is our, this is what we do here in this world to, for our days in the hereafter, something that good that we can do to help other people. So it's a very personal thing for him as well. Yeah, so again, the other things that we did just now, I'm just reiterating here again. But strong support and commitment from the Minister of Education at that time managed to push it through. All right. So we just hope that many ministers will have that kind of empathy. But it's a bit. A lot of work needs to be done, okay, for that to happen. And we're talking with Ikmal, right? Every time the government changes, it's always reset button, start from zero again. Government changes, reset button, start from zero. So, it's a very tiring journey. Okay, so but that is the things that we experience here in Malaysian case. Okay, next please. Okay, history is the best teacher, all right. The instructions was not followed, Why? Because one of it is because the directive was sent to the deputy vice chancellor, not the vice chancellor themselves. Because maybe it wasn't taken up because of that, all right. And in fact, during the launching, this is some untold stories I'm just sharing with you, all right. So, in fact, we wanted the minister to actually hand it to the VC, right. 3 days before the launching, we got information that most of the VCs were not attending. They wanted to send even junior lecturers to attend the event. So then we informed the minister. Minister said, okay, give me the list. He actually called out one by one. Called out the VC. So on the day itself, wow, everybody turned out. Except for only 2 who actually had to, had to go overseas. So I think that's quite okay, But the turnout was fantastic, and we managed to do that. It was handed to the VCs. We give them a very very a big publicity for the event. There's also a press conference, after that. So it's very widely publicized in newspapers as well. Next, please. Okay. Okay, and of course, okay, there was a monitoring and implementation failure. Okay. Because there's no dedicated department still until now, okay, and as a result of that, it's very tragic that in 2021 UPU is our what do you call it, a division that processes new admissions into university. Okay, they were under attack. Why? Because they developed a system in UPU whereby students with disabilities can only apply for courses which are tagged as disabled friendly, quote unquote. And who actually decides that? I was quite horrified actually when I learned that the ministry actually asked all the universities to identify which program are suitable for which disability. You cannot do that. We cannot do that. That is discrimination. Because sometimes you do not know what kind of disability they have. The severity, not everybody has got severe disability. Some are only got minor, only 2 fingers are not there. You tell me that they cannot take the programs? It doesn't make sense, isn't it? We even have doctors, dentists who have disabilities, but now we are blocking them from taking the courses, So it's very, very unfair, and in fact they were under fire because one student actually brought it to the papers, to the newspaper, using the nickname Karishma. She actually got 9 A's. Straight A's, 9 A's. But she couldn't get access to apply to programs, So we actually get in touch with the Senator Ras Adibai at that time, all right, and she managed to get an appointment with the Honourable Minister, all right. So we actually had a discussion online meeting because at the time was still the lockdown period. So we had a meeting online, and the minister was actually surprised that it happened. So 2 hours after that meeting, the tagging was lifted. Tagging was lifted, and we checked with parents. They said, "Oh, now our children, we can now apply for other courses, right?" So alhamdulillah, that was solved. But unfortunately, the additional criteria Then where they still have that which type of disability for certain types of programs. For some universities, is still there. Okay, I'm not sure about UPSI. Maybe you can check. You can check, right? So you can check because for us, I know because sometimes I think what happened was that the universities brought it to the Senate. Once it's endorsed by the Senate, it's stuck there. You have to bring it to the Senate. But fortunately for IIM, we didn't bring it to the Senate. They treat it as administrative. It was just on the system. So when they untag it, they just untag the system without touching the actual, the previous conditions, admission requirements, right? So I hope we can check all our admission requirements so that we don't have this, right, Jen? It's quite discriminatory, right, to have that. Yeah, true. Okay, so next. So this was the case for that, the girl just now. All right, the response. She this was the case. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's in Malay. All right, because it's one in the portal, the Malaysia, the news portal. She was actually asked to withdraw, okay, from a program, and then when she posted her question, the answer was that thank you, we congratulate you, for applying, but he said you are okay. What I say? Berdasarkan semakan caranya. Okay, based on the what they see, the candidate has got a disability. Okay, so you are only allowed to apply for certain programs. Okay, which have facilities for you. So that's the problem. So if the program doesn't have facilities for the disabled, so they're not allowed to take the program. So it's very, very discriminatory, right? So hopefully this doesn't happen again, right? In the system is no more tagging, but unfortunately in the record, in the admission requirements for some universities is still there. So I hope we can spread the word and it can actually be undone. Yeah. So next, please. Okay, so conclusion, this is just a summary. Okay, so again, we need to actually revise our Personal Disabilities Act so that it has got some teeth to help our implementation of inclusivity, right? And then, of course, we need a department or a unit at the Ministry of Higher Education to monitor implementation of disability inclusion. Of course, in the Malaysian context, we need political will and commitment from the top. Challenge is actually to convince the top leader. How do we convince the top leader, right? So from what our experience, the way we did it is that, next please. Okay, how do we overcome this challenge and try to convince the top leader? We raise it, with the minister using the NEAC or NPPK platform. Okay, we actually wrote a detailed report on the issue, okay, so that the minister can see the problem that is, that we're facing. And then we established a credible task force, all right, and then launching of the guidelines attended by vice chancellors, okay, and handed personally by the minister to the VC. And then we give a very large media coverage, okay, including a press conference with the minister. Right, so very important message to set up the DSU and come up with a strategic plan for disability inclusion. Yeah, next. Okay, so this was the news that came out, right? So all universities must be completely friendly within 10 years, okay? All right, and then semua universiti wajib laksana. It's compulsory to implement the inclusion policy, right? But of course, this was during his tenure. But unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. It depends on where you are. Okay, he actually stepped down in 2020, January of 2020. So after that, so where are we going after that? So we hope that it doesn't suffer the same fate as the 2012 directive, right? But looking at things, if you don't do anything in terms of at least establishing a unit, it might actually suffer the same fate, right? But still, again, the fact that we are here today, okay, we hope we can keep it alive, okay, and keep it moving, right? And even if the ministry doesn't have that unit, I mean, we ourselves, we are quite autonomous, isn't it? We have autonomy. We can actually, I really hope that, if we are given the opportunity to hold the leadership of any organization or university, we hope that, please include the disability agenda into the university as part of the university's agenda, because a lot of time it is being forgotten, right? Thank you very much. Okay. Is there any questions?
Any questions?
Yes. Usana.
I'm a parent of, thank you. This is better, all right. I'm a mother of 4 boys. 3 of them has learning disabilities. When you presented all these guidelines, it sounds and seems comprehensive, but I just wish to have just a little sneak peek on how well does it cover learning disabilities per se. Because when we talk about physical disabilities, we are focusing on infrastructures, whether the university has the facilities and stuff like that. But when we're talking about students with special learning, disabilities like my children, how well does it cover and how? Because even if they wish to go to secondary school, they're still subjected to a lot of prejudice, let alone higher education. So I just wish to know perhaps anything that you guys have done inside the committee or the guidelines to support those quite devastating parents who has children with learning disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Puan Salwa. First, I salute you. It's not easy to have 3 children with learning disabilities, right? Actually, the guideline covers all types of disabilities. Right? In Malaysia, somehow they categorize as 7 categories, but I know there are more than that in other countries. But it covers also learning disabilities, which also includes autism, dyslexia, ADHD, all the learning disabilities. This is what I meant when I spoke to the TNCs, right? So a lot of things does not require a single cent. It actually just require our love, okay, and our willingness to assist and support. All right, so that is actually applicable to a lot of students with learning disabilities, mental illness, and mental health issues. All right, mental disabilities. Those are the groups these are invisible disabilities, but they actually require support. Okay, without support, they will not be able to perform this as well, and they will have, they will not be able to lead a full life at the university, because they have students with autism. For example, we actually currently have about 13 students with autism. I'm not sure whether you know about Arif. Okay, we must be one of his friends. He was supposed to come today, but he overslept. It was like, so we're waiting, okay, Arif, where are you, Arif? Then he just called, sorry, I overslept. Okay. Yesterday he was very excited to come, but he couldn't make it. Arif is a very, very, classic example of a student with autism. He's not actually having mild autism, he's actually having moderate autism. His mental age is actually only between 6 to 8 years old. He plays with Power Rangers. He has a Power Rangers suit. Okay, all right. He plays with toys. We buy him toys actually. He learns with toys. He relates. He connects his learning with toys. It helps him learn better. And in fact, he can also teach. When he teaches us, we can understand very, very clearly. Because the way he teaches is very, very simple and clear. The way they see it. And right now he's doing his PhD. Okay, in Islamic studies, right? But he's a classic example, of, to me, a case whereby I know in the system in lower education, sometimes it's not helping, right? Parents have got a dilemma: should I get a OQ card? No, or not? Shouldn't I get an OQ card? Sometimes the moment you get the card, they put the student in the PPTI. So the student cannot learn in the mainstream education, whereas in fact the student can learn. Arif is a classic case because he wasn't registered, right? I think if he had been registered, he might not have reached us. He might not have reached us, But that is, the point that I'm trying to make. We should actually give a chance to them. Okay, because they can actually perform if given the opportunity, given the support, right? So we only know about him during his third year of studies. So he came to our office because he couldn't find his way to the exam venue because his friends who usually takes him have graduated. So that was the time that we found out about him. So, okay, Nabi Ma'arif, you get yourself registered. Okay, then we can support you. So now he's a regular person at our office. Sometimes the students think that he's part of our staff. Okay, because he always wear very smart, necktie and shirt. So, but he's a very classic case, and to me, there is hope. There is hope, inshallah. But unfortunately, our policy guidelines is only for higher education, right? For lower education, actually, there was this zero reject policy. Or if people don't like that term now, it should be, maybe we can call it inclusive education, right? So, but unfortunately, sometimes. This is why the empathy is not there. Some students, they even students in the PPKI, the SEIP, in the separate, in the mainstream school, but they are in separate classes. The teachers bring them back to the CBR, community-based rehabilitation, PDK. Why they say that this doesn't know how to toilet train. Why? Because our system does not have enough early intervention centres. We need to have more early intervention centres, right? But I heard that they are actually going to have one in each state now. They are in the process of developing that. So hopefully, for children with learning disabilities, they can get supported right from the very beginning, early intervention, and it's going to make it easier for them to follow the mainstream education, right? So hopefully, teachers also, the mindset, we actually have to work together. UPSI has a role to play. UPSI, a very, very, very important role to play. In fact, a few weeks ago, we were approached by JPN, the state education office. They wanted to collaborate with us to actually have programs with the schools in Selangor, in Wilayah Persekutuan. So there will be one that they're actually organising for special education teachers. But then on our part, we say, okay, can we actually go and see your director at the state education office? The reason is because we want to offer some training programs for the other teachers, the regular teachers, as well as the head mistresses. Okay, the principals, right? Why? Because sometimes they don't have the knowledge. They think that all disabilities are the same. The moment you talk about disability, they just visualize a wheelchair, person on wheelchair, just because the logo is a wheelchair logo. Right? So the thing is always wheelchair. So wheelchair, cannot, So that kind of stigma we have to actually we have to actually try to overcome. So this is the mindset transformation program that we're talking about. So all of us need to play a role. Okay, I think if UPSI can actually incorporate that in the system, in the training system for even regular teachers, because sometimes the regular teachers, they get students in the mainstream, but they do not know how to actually support them. There are students with autism and so on who can actually learn, but it's unfortunate because sometimes they get bullied. They get bullied because they're different. They have communication problems. They have social skills problems, right? So they get bullied. Most of the cases they get bullied, and then they develop depression. So if we can actually assist, and we have our teachers who have better empathy, hands-on. I think PDK in universities are wonderful. UIA also has got grant for that. We have also established a PDK in IIM Gombak. This is the place where I think the teachers that we are currently training can get hands-on experience. So I think we can fully utilize our PDKs as a living lab, and hopefully our teachers can have a better understanding and empathy towards our children future, inshallah. But Puan, we can talk. If there's anything that we can assist you, please let us know, inshallah. Okay, all right. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
thinking in my head, if you are at this stage of inclusion policy, okay, thank you. I'm thinking in my head, if you are at this stage of inclusion policy, what stage is Nigeria in? Okay, because I'm from Nigeria and I know that, yes, we know that, yeah, we might be people of sympathy, but when it comes to inclusion, it's still way behind. Most of the time, we don't also have a lot of facilities. We have a lot of NGOs bringing in facilities. So most of our children, I think the positive part is most of our children with disabilities end up in the normal mainstream school. So it helps them grow. But my concern is I hope you have, because people like you that are always forefront of a particular, let's just say, mission, okay? I think it's always good when you have people that you mentor, that you train, that in the end when you retire, they go ahead with the process. Because in the end, just like you said, just like in my country too, the government changes, everything changes. Everything goes with the government. And just like you said, there used to be a man that handled cases of disability, but he retired, the whole process has. I hope that we have special units here in the faculty. I hope that you have people in different universities that you incorporate in making sure that this inclusion policy, because it's also you have so many researchers going into inclusion policy and so on. And, you know, maybe because we're still Africans, we still have the traditional thinking that's still hinder some of this progress. But I hope that maybe we are learning from you. So if you're able to do well, they are doing well, from that we learn from you.
Yeah,
so
we learn
in
from
the
each
head,
other. Yeah,
in the
true.
head, you know, you said it's small boy, yeah.
Yeah,
So in
true.
the head, the world progresses. And I hope that live in a better place. Because as a psychologist, recently we had this intervention assessment workshop. So our students learning in different facilities. And unfortunately, most of them that had students or children, you know, to assess with one particular mental health issue or the other, always have issues in school. And you mentioned one of the major issues, bullying. And some of them also have parents that are confused. So if the parents want to help their child, but they don't know how, and they can only learn from people that are in the system, that understand the policies, and, you know, just like she has asked, you know. So once, I hope you have people you're mentoring that will told this line. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sister. Yes, we are working on that actually. In fact, the team that we have is actually the first main group, you know, of mentors, and there are now positions in various DSUs. UITM, for instance, Dr. Roslinda is actually one of our. He's actually one of our graduate as well, right? So you know, so we want to spread, you know, the knowledge and the, you know, advocacy and enthusiasm, right? Because. So this is the thing that, you know, it is something that, you know, it has to come from the heart, you know. You have to touch people's hearts. You know. Sometimes, in order to get people to work with you, you need to do that, right? We have actually a student from Sudan, you know, in IIUM, and you know, her timing cannot be, you know, cannot be better, because when she came, we were just established in 2012, and she was actually paralyzed from the neck down because of an accident. She has screws all over her body. All right. She has a personal assistant to assist her because she cannot move. She can only move 2 fingers to, you know, type on the keyboard. But mashallah, she is very, very determined, you know. And you know, and because we supported her during her stay at the university. Now she's finished her masters. She did her PhD. She finished her PhD with 2 fingers, right? Now she's back in Sudan. I think she's also sometimes in Dubai. She wants to set up something like that, you know, in Sudan, you know. So this is the thing that we want to spread. You know? She's still in touch with us, you know, so that we can collaborate and we can actually have programs and, you know, to create awareness and, you know, share the knowledge, share the experiences, right? So we continue to learn from each other. Yes, I think it's very important. And you know, as you rightly put it, you know, we have to make it to snowballing, right? And the advocacy, we really need everybody's help, not just people with disabilities, because sometimes people with disabilities, sometimes they get frustrated, right? And harsh words comes out from their mouth sometimes, you know, because of frustration, you know. Sometimes you feel, oh, okay, shouldn't have said that, you know, but Why? Well, it happened. Sometimes it happens because of the years of frustrations. Not defending them, but of course, there's sometimes some people are just rude. Okay, because people do this are just human beings. So we are basically that. So, but what we need is actually everybody's help. To do the advocacy and help make it visible, okay? Write a lot, in newspapers, social media, and TikTok or whatever, I'm not good at that, So, but, especially the younger generation, I think they can also help a lot, okay, inshallah. Thank you, sister.
Okay.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. Right, hope that you're doing well. My name is Mahfuza, so I would like to ask your opinion, basically. So I've been teaching at university for 10 years, and I've had my own experience of working with the students with disabilities in class, basically. So the problem that was having, even before the execution of the 4 laluan khas, zero job policy and whatnot. So the problem that I'm having in class right now is basically because of the rate taps or bureaucracy of the university itself. So what I'm trying to say here is, for example, if I'm as a lecturer, I would like to try to adjust with assessment, depending on the disability of the students themselves. So I was being, reprimanded, because I know that there's a term of reasonable adjustment being stated in the policy. But the problem is there's no clear guideline or sort of like an explanation about what is the reasonable adjustment that can be done in classroom itself. And I think everyone knows as well that at higher education level, we are still lacking in terms of trainings to lecturers and whatnot. So the problem is, as I said before, bureaucracy and whatnot, because we are not at the liberty to make that kind of adjustment, as I've mentioned before, especially regarding to teaching and learning and assessment in particular. And how can we go about that? How can we go and cross and help them as much as we can without having, touching on the sensitive issues of the administrations, university policies and whatnot? Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. I think very important context there. This is why we need to have that mindset transformation program at all levels. Okay, not just academics, the lecturers. Lecturers may want to do it, but administrators do not understand. I understand the frustration. Sometimes I still face it. I still get remarks like, Prof, she has to learn to be resilient, If you're not resilient, you cannot succeed in life. Okay, right. Okay, so I pause for a while, okay. Calm down, okay. Then I text back, say, okay, talk about resilience. Yeah, you're right, resilience is very important. But talk about resilience, I'm sure she had to be resilient every single minute of her life because of her impairment, because of her disability. So don't talk about resilience to her, because she knows it, and she has it. Otherwise, she will not be around and still studying here, right? So, but the thing is that, what she has to understand, the dean or whoever, has to understand is that what we're doing, the support that we're giving, the adjustment, the flexibility that we're giving, is not to make their life easier. Because that's the impression that they think. It's not making their life easier. It's actually making their lives less difficult. It's actually less difficult. It is still difficult, but I'm just helping them to make it less difficult. I think that one we have to actually, pass the message to everybody, because when I hear that, okay, I'm not doing a good job and making people understand, because I thought people understand, but still there's some who still do not understand, right? So I think, but actually I'm learning something there, learning something. Okay, this is how people perceive it. Okay, so now we change. Okay, we improve our sharing to also include, this kind of thinking, right? Because I'm sure if she thinks like that, many people also think like that. And this is coming from somebody who is a very nice person. She's actually a very nice person, very good, But she has that thinking. Maybe because they think macam susah, like very difficult, always want to accommodate. What's so difficult? Sometimes it's just like allowing her to use an iPad to write the exam. you know. So if you don't trust her, have an exam assistant next to her, you know. So what is the problem, you know? So to me, if you see it as a problem, it becomes a problem, you know. It is not something that is not doable. And the thing is, for us to actually spell out these certain things require this, we can't do that because different people have got different needs, different types of support. Even with people with autism, right? No two persons with autism, you know, are the same. Okay, it's a spectrum, right? For other types of disabilities, also the same, right? For many people, they don't even need any support. Okay, because it's quite minimal for them. So he said, no, it's okay. Even for myself, when I was a student, I never got extra time. Why? Because I can answer, you know, same way as other people, you know, so I don't need extra time. But some the other people who may need it because of their impairment in their right hand, maybe, you know, when they cannot write, you know, very well, right? So these are the things that we have to put ourselves in their shoes, and we have to actually educate. Okay, educate. Itulah if possible kan. In fact, Dato' Yusri and myself actually we actually do trainings actually. We do programs. We call it leadership, disability inclusive leadership programs. We don't call it mindset transformation, of course. You know, people will think that we're trying to brainwash people, right? But no, that's not what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to share, you know, give some knowledge of what disability is all about. You know, it is people do not become disabled because of their impairment. There's a difference there. It is the environment that makes them disabled, right? So I think if you can understand that, it's the barriers that makes people disabled. So we need to break down the barriers, right? And there are some people who cannot do certain things. These represents gaps, you know. If you were to walk, these are holes on the floor. So how do we allow people to walk on the floor? You have to build the bridges. So that they can also still continue to walk safely, right? So breaking the barriers, building the bridges, very critical elements in inclusivity. So for people learning disabilities, it's a lot about building bridges because they have a lot of impairments, that skills that, you know, lacking, that we need to actually gauge, you know, that's you know, lacking in skills. So we need to have an open heart, you know. So this is where empathy is very important, and sometimes just common sense, you know. If I can just relate, when I first joined IUM in 1983, nobody knows about UNCRPD, nobody knows about reasonable accommodation, but it's just common sense. You know? So, you know, they say, oh, okay, now we have, they're very helpful. Okay, we put you in a place where it's easy for you to go to the toilet. Oh, we don't have a toilet, you know, a seated toilet, all are squatting toilet. So what do we do? Okay, they were just trying to figure out, okay, they bought the commode at that time, you know, to help me manage. And then, the deputy director, I remember, came one night to my residential college, called everybody, all my friends, because we're the first batch, so we just few of us. So he called everybody, said, you know, now you have your friend here, she's having this disability. If she falls, everybody gets the sin, you know, berdosa. Semua orang berdosa, you know, everybody is actually will get the repercussions, you know, not necessarily from the university, but from God, you know, from God, you know. So you have to take care of her, you know. So you know, but really, you know, I think it is the mindset. You know, it is actually the mindset in the willingness to accept, right, the people of different abilities, right, types of disabilities, you know, is what's important, because we're all the same, you know, we're all God's creation. Nobody wants to become disabled, right? So, but once they have it, you know, it is actually a test not on the person, you know, it's actually on the society. How actually do you assist, you know, this person? Okay, so if we die, you know, we have to be answerable. You have these students, you know, in your university. What have you done to help them? You know, so I think we also need to, for Muslims, we can put it in that context, right? For the religious context also, right? But of course, you know, as human beings, you know, it is a right. It's a right-based approach now, no longer a charity approach. Yeah, it's a rights-based approach now. Yeah?
Questions? Just one.
May I? Assalamualaikum, Prof. Thank you. Really inspired, actually, listening to your soft and soothing voice, sharing your hands-on experience. But I think it's my responsibility and take this chance to actually perhaps explain, because I'm from the Ministry of Education. Yeah, from Curriculum Development Division, and I would also perhaps talk from my perspective as an ex-teacher, mainstream teacher, and also Guru Shumalam Pendidikan Kelas, excellent special education teachers. So first of all, you actually mentioned about 3 programs that we have in Malaysia about inclusive education, something like that, some sort of ways. For me, it's still actually based on physical placements. So we have program pendidikan khas integrasi, special education program. We also have program pendidikan khas for visual and hearing impact. And we have this, what we call program pendidikan inclusive, where pupils with SEN, they would say, even in our blueprint, it's 3 to 5 pupils with special educational needs learns in the mainstream classroom. So that is what happened now in Malaysia. So for total inclusion, it's actually not like that. It's not like that. In the Ministry of Education lately, we have this discussion, Cecily Baurus, with a doctor from Finland. So she has been sharing sort of what is happening in Finland. And of course, we have, last time we have this online session with Australian as well, Professor Dr. David Evans, and of course you know him, right, Prof. Chan? And from the UK, Professor Emeritus Richard Rose. So in Finland, if I may share this, in Finland, there is no segregation of these sort of schools. So there is only one schools, but they have these layers of support. So those who need that specific extra supports, they would actually accommodate from the early childhood. I mean, that is what we are lacking. You have mentioned about that early intervention programs in Malaysia is still lacking. So that is what we are lacking. So they would actually transport these students to the schools, and they host all sorts of therapies and so on. So you also have mentioned about zero reject policy. Yes, in the past, pupils with special educational needs, I mentioned pupils with special educational needs because Ms. Salawat just now mentioned, it seems like disabled people are visualized by those on wheelchair, because it's really difficult to visualize autistic, Down syndrome. Susah nak lukis kan? Nak lukis mata mungkin Down syndrome dah nampak. So it's really difficult. So what we can do is visualize people on wheelchair. So what I try to do now, letaklah this visual, hearing, something like that. So that's what happened. So just now, what did I see? Just now is about, no. Sorry, I forgot my point actually. Yeah, my apology. So what? Oh, zero reject policy, right? So in the past, zero reject policy, yeah, people with special educational needs would actually be sent to schools, and then we have this sort of period where teachers would observe them whether they can actually independent, they can go to the toilet on their own. That's what happened. And then within that period, 3 months period, 3 to 6 months, the teachers would produce a report, and then perhaps they would actually suggest to the parents to send that pupils to go to the PDK first. PDK is actually, in English we call it rehabilitation center, something like that.
Community-based.
Yeah, community-based rehabilitation center like that. So, but that's not what happened nowadays, because whoever it is, teachers need to, schools need to accept the pupils. So that's what happened for zero reject policy. So that's the issue as well, because teachers would actually accept pupils dengan pampers yang penuh, the pampers. Yeah, Yeah, that's what happened. So that's my experience, and that's what happened. So that's and also an debate and discussion on the terms that we use, because it's gathered as OKU. OKU means disabled. So what kind of disabled that we actually are talking about? The severity, as you said. Even the Ministry of Health, Women, Kementerian Pembangunan Wanita dan Masyarakat actually specify that 7 categories: the visual, the hearing, the physical, the speech, multiple, and learning difficulties. See, learning difficulties, but here we say that learning disabilities, and those are having different spectrums, different needs and different supports, right? So that's what happened. Another thing is perhaps you have also mentioned about the empathy. So this is where I think the values. So it's really difficult to translate these values in Malay. So one of my colleagues actually translate that to as roh inclusive values as roh inclusive. So I would like to actually take us back to you have mentioned about heart. So with the heart, you have belief, you have that values, and then you have that knowledge, of course, knowledge, and then you need to take action, the hand, that 3 metaphor: heart, head, and hands. So this is where teachers to be, every one of us need to improve ourselves professionally, because effective teachers, quality teachers is actually effective to all. I think that's not actually a question, just to share a bit of what happened in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, we don't have department for special education, for lower education, but we have division, special education division, which actually tackle on the issues of operational, whereas in curriculum development division, we have special education sector, which are responsible for curriculum and all those modules and supports for curriculum. So that's what happened in Malaysia. So still, we are not, perhaps not similar as Nigeria, because or Tanzania, because I live in the UK. I have friends from all over the world as well. So, but then we are still lacking. In the past, we used to have Singapore, Thailand, Cambodia come to us to see what we have been doing, but now they are far, far more beyond us, right, in inclusive education. So I think this is a very good platform for us to discuss a bit further on this. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Puan apa tadi?
Saya Lily. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so Malaysia, sometimes we have very nice policies. The Malaysian Education Blueprint, very nice. But who actually, yeah, it's always implementation. I'm not just talking about education, all, all ministries, not just education. That's our weakness, So we spend time coming up with very nice, complete, comprehensive documents, and yet we fail in terms of making sure that it's implemented properly. Where did we go wrong? How come? Why is it that we have reached, that level? Maybe, okay, maybe. Right, so it's up for discussion, right? But thank you, Puan. Yeah, but yeah, sometimes it's a matter of opinion as well, in terms of. It's true, of course, the regional policy has got its drawbacks as well, because they cannot be rejected. So teachers have got a tough time. I understand that, and that's why it has to, it has to trigger the early intervention, more early intervention programs to be set up. The centers, and I think without that, because now I heard that maybe you can verify if it's true that more early intervention centers will be set up in every state. Am I right? Sorry?
Okay, thank you, Prof. I just actually chip in tadi because we are talking about that inclusivity. But when we talk about inclusive, what is that inclusivity that we are talking about? there are a lot of supports actually, even for people with autism, people with disability. Of course, they need that physical environment, facilities, and so on. But then, in terms of that, so whatever identifications or labels that we give them is not to label them. For me, it's actually to really, when we know what is their support, it's kind of like we identify them because we need to know what kind of support that we need to actually offer to give them, that kind of thing. Not like to label them, okay, then we have this stigma and then we look down on them. That's something that we need to actually remember.
No. So that's that's what we do.
Yeah.
Because in terms of support, they also have to they have to agree on disclosure.
Yeah.
For instance, right? Because if they don't agree on disclosure, we cannot support them.
Correct.
For instance, right? So and it's not labeling, it's actually identifying their needs, as you rightly put it, and it's not negative discrimination. It's actually, if you want to call it discrimination, it's actually positive discrimination, where you actually identify their needs, because of the disability, but with the intention of assisting them. Assisting them. So that's positive discrimination.
Yeah.
There are many good souls at MOE actually. In Kementerian Pendidikan, Malaysia. I know many of them. Very good people. Very good intention. They also are sometimes frustrated. They want to see changes. Taking place. But good. Because if zero reject policy was or inclusive education is not there. I'm sure it will not trigger that need for early intervention. For so long, it wasn't given attention. But once the teachers face difficulties, now it becomes an issue because they cannot turn away the children. So what do? Then they see the need for the early intervention center.
Yeah. But another thing is, panjang pula kan. Can stop. Maybe tak apa. We continue discussion after this, Prof. Thank you. Yeah. My apology.
Right, thank you.
Okay, so we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Dr. Rizita for graciously sharing her profound insights regarding this topic. The knowledge and expertise she has imparted has been a tremendous value and significant step. So thank you once again, Professor Dr. Rizita. So, ladies and gentlemen, we kindly request your full presence and participation throughout the program. So, your cooperation in this matter is greatly appreciated. So, allow me to express my sincere gratitude once again to each and every individual present here, for your esteemed presence has truly enriched our program. Your presence is deeply appreciated and highly valued. So following this session, we shall proceed to a brief intermission before we are resuming to our program for concurrent session. This session include sharing research on people with disability, featuring Professor Jennifer in room 1 at the Bilik Mesyuarat Utama. And then as for the second concurrent session, Person with Disability Act 2008, Issues and Challenges Ahead with Dr. Iqmal Hisham, will be at room 2 at the Aminuddin Baki Hall, in this hall. So prior to our departure from this room, I would like to make a few announcements. So firstly, I would like to announce that lunches are provided, and we cordially invite all esteemed guests, administration officers from the Faculty of Human Development, and all participants together at Bilik Zabah for lunch. And another reminder for our Muslim participants, you may perform the afternoon prayer at the prayer hall on this first floor, I believe. Oh yeah, all right. So, and last but not least, participants, please proceed to the registration table to collect your certificate of participation for this symposium. And before I forget, I would like to request the VIPs and all esteemed speakers not to leave this room for another photography session with the Dean of the Faculty of Human Development. All right. And then I think that's all. We're anticipating your presence once again promptly at 2 p.m. With that, I hereby conclude my role as the Master of Ceremonies for today's program. Thank you and have a good day.